With that, I will call the meeting to order. We have quorum, thank you. And I do have a few remarks, as is the normal course. As people will know from our last meeting, it's a virtual meeting with the challenges and opportunities that comes with that. And so this meeting is online because of the social distancing requirements of COVID-19. And we are live streaming this and recording this for our YouTube television station. And we are also having deputations on this one, and I figured that out, so that is a good thing. First, obviously, I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement that we hold this virtual meeting on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And the land is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I also want to acknowledge that this past Sunday, June 21st, was National Indigenous Peoples Day, which is a day for all Canadians to recognize and celebrate the unique heritage, diverse cultures, and outstanding contributions of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And that June is National Indigenous History Month. As we did for our last board meeting on April 27th, this is a virtual meeting. Made some changes, as I've noted, to live stream this and to allow deputations. The live stream will be posted, as I said, on our live YouTube channel for millions. I want to thank the governance and IT staff for their efforts in making this possible. I do want to note that as people may be aware, and as we announced yesterday, the board has launched an executive search process for a new president and CEO following the decision of our current CEO, Kevin Marchand, to retire in March of 2021, which was his planned retirement date all along, and we couldn't talk him out of it. So I do want to thank Kevin for his leadership, positioning TCHC for success through his relentless focus on improving service delivery and business performance to meet the needs of tenants. As I noted, Kevin's been transparent with the board on his plans to retire in March of 2021 all along. And so in order to ensure we have enough time for succession process, we started it now. As noted, the board has retained Amrop Knightsbridge, Executive Search Division of LHH Knightsbridge, to lead the search. The committee has been formed to conduct that search, chaired by Brian Smith, and members are Deputy Mayor Bailau, Councillor Fletcher, Uba Farah, Debbie Douglas, Adele Imra, and me. We're very confident that the search committee will find a successful candidate with the skills, experience, diversity, and personal characteristics to lead the corporation forward. And we will keep the people appropriately informed as the process unfolds, and obviously communicate the results once the successful candidate has been selected. I'd also like to speak to the issue of anti-Black racism, and as people are well aware, over the past weeks there's been an outpouring of intense emotions in response to anti-Black racism following the murder of George Floyd in the United States, and here in Toronto, the call for answers in the tragic death of Regis Kwaczynski-Paquette. Regis was a young woman of Black and Indigenous descent who lived with her family at 100 High Park at TCHC building. Her untimely death has deeply affected many people in our city. On behalf of the board, I want to extend our condolences to Regis's family. At this difficult time, both the board and management are committed to confronting and eliminating anti-Black racism. Earlier this week, in a statement to employees, our CEO, Kevin Marchand, described the corporation's commitment to confronting anti-Black racism and to developing an anti-Black racism action plan for TCHC, working closely with the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit at the City of Toronto. As well as many of you know, June is Pride Month, and I would like to wish everyone a happy Pride. On June 1st, the rainbow flag and transgender flag were raised at City Hall to proclaim Pride Month in Toronto. Pride is an important event that brings people together to celebrate the history, courage, accomplishment, and diversity of our city's lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex, queer, questioning, two-spirit communities. I wish a happy Pride Day to the TCHC Pride Network. The network is an inclusive group of volunteers that supports LGBTQ2S+ employees and allies to bring their whole selves to work. And I want to thank the members of the TCHC Pride Network for their work they're doing to create a safer, more equitable, and respectful working environment at TCHC. Pride is an opportunity to reflect on the progress made and to protect the rights of LGBTQ+TS communities, and much more needs to be done to confront intolerance and stand together against all forms of hatred and discrimination. A new point this morning, the board will hold a presentation from the Toronto Ombudsman, Susan Opler. The board has benefited from the Ombudsman's advice on many occasions over the years, and we value the dialogue we've had with our office to support more timely, consistent, and transparent services to tenants. Both the board and management asked the Ombudsman if she would share information on the substantial year-over-year increase in the number of complaints her office received from TCHC tenants in 2018. Many tenants were choosing to escalate their complaints directly to our office as the complaint process within TCHC was not well defined. We also asked the Ombudsman to make this information public to further our goal of transparency. Following the Ombudsman presentation, management will update the board on the implementation of new solutions team and complaints process and on steps being taken to increase tenant awareness of that new process. In terms of the confidential part of the meeting this morning, there are no approvals or decisions to report out. Now turning to the public session, multiple items will be brought forward to this board's approval that were reviewed by the BIFAC on July 7th. BIFAC, most of them related to contract awards. We will have a report from the president, Kevin Marshman, on operational performance matters, in particular related to responses to COVID-19. I'd like to note that management and staff have been working diligently over the past 3 months to deliver essential services pardon me, in our buildings, provide service to tenants and take measures to limit the spread of virus. On behalf of the board, I want to thank the company once again for their tremendous work during this emergency. Finally, we will hear an update on how the corporation is implementing changes recommended in the Rubin Tomlinson report and identified by the issues that were raised in it, and how TCHC conducts workplace investigations, which was deferred at the April 27th meeting. With that, let's begin our meeting. So, first, I'm just wondering whether we've gone up. So, first is, I guess we should canvass people around the. Is there anything I need to say about the deputation process there?
So the only difference that will distinguish this process we follow today from what we've done in the past is because we're live streaming today's meeting, we actually have the opportunity for deputants to participate in the meeting in real time. Governance staff will join them to the meeting so that they can interact with the board in making their deputation. And then once their deputation is concluded, we'll exit them out of the meeting, but they will continue to be able to watch the meeting as part of the live stream.
Great, thank you. I remind the board to use the chat function, as some of you very capably done during the confidential session, just to identify to the board secretary that you want to raise a question, just so we have a system to manage and make sure, because we would seek people to be on mute when they're not in session, just to prevent background noise. If we don't get to you, though, make sure we, you put yourself on mute and off mute and say something. But if we could try the chat function. As noted, absence of a specific request, we will conduct votes by a show of hands. And obviously, your camera needs to be on for that purpose and make sure that they are. If a voice vote is required, we will do that on any item, and Dara will administer that process. So with that, on to the consent agenda. And ask, so that's I think up in front of us there. And then, as I guess first, I want to make sure that folks, any conflicts of interest from the board? So hearing none for any agenda item. Is there any, I guess I need a motion, Darren, at this point to approve the agenda?
Yes, I see, sorry, can we have a mover and a seconder?
Nick and John? All those in favor?
On a hand, I see the chair, Adele, I see Amanda Coombs, Debbie Douglas, Linda Jackson, Farah, Nick McRae, see Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Bylaw, can we have your vote? Yep, can we have your vote? Yes. The motion passes unanimously.
All right. I guess we should move anything. Do we need a separate motion for the minutes, or are we okay on that? Because that's in the consent agenda.
With the motion to adopt the consent agenda, the board has adopted the minutes.
Perfect. Thank you, Darren. All right, so on to item 3. 3A, I guess, more accurately. I see Susan Opler, but I cannot hear Susan Opler.
Got deputations here.
So we do have 2 deputations from members of the public to this matter. And so we can bring them into the meeting for the purpose of allowing the board to hear their deputation before Ms. Opler makes her presentation.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yes. Can you hear us?
Perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. So I think we have a couple of deputations first, and then we'll see to you. So, Dara, I will ask you to administer that process on our behalf.
The first individual who's indicated that they want to depute in relation to the matter is Miguel Avila Velarde. Is Miguel in the call? And Miguel,
Mr. Avila, are you online?
Miguel, in the call?
Miguel?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you, Miguel, and I would ask all others on the call to please mute their phones so that we don't get any background noise, so we can hear Miguel.
All right. Okay.
Yeah,
Can I go ahead?
yeah. And that is what
A minute, I'll see if I can sort this out.
Dara, hang on. Dara?
Yes.
Yes.
Just if we're having technical difficulties, is it inappropriate to have the deputations after we hear from?
Why don't we try that?
Yeah. So we'll just for the deputants apologize. I guess we're having slight technical difficulties. What we'll do is we'll hear from the Ombudsman first, and then we'll have your deputations afterwards. So thank you for your patience. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to Susan Opler. And thank you for your virtual attendance with us, and much appreciate your effort and time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation. I am just going to make a few remarks about the report, which I hope the board members have had the opportunity to read. I'm just going to share my screen because I have a couple of slides to accompany my remarks. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much again. This report is not the usual kind of report that my office produces, but as was mentioned by the chair, both TCHC management and the board have asked me over the last few months for more information about the complaints that come to my office concerning TCHC. And I decided that it was in the best interests of tenants, of the corporation, and of the public that I share this report publicly. So for that reason, I do appreciate the opportunity, not just to present the report or to give the report to the board, but also to present it to you. I'm going to cover 5 areas in this presentation, but I promise I will do so quickly because I know that your time is at a premium and I have fewer than 10 slides. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my office's mandate and role, an overview of the data that the report contains about the complaints that we get about TCHC, some conclusions, some recommendations, and then next steps. Ombudsman Toronto was created by the province with the City of Toronto Act, and as you know, I hope, we are part of an independent accountability framework at the city, which includes 4 different accountability officers. Our work is governed by the City of Toronto Act and also by the Municipal Code, and we operate under legislative mandate, independently and impartially. What we do is we respond to a broad range of complaints and concerns about a number of city organizations, all the city divisions, and that includes corporations like TCHC. When problems come to our attention, we investigate and we make findings and recommendations in the public interest. We look into whether services have been delivered fairly and policies administered fairly and equitably. When we talk about fairness, we look at it through this, what we call our fairness triangle. This is how administrative fairness or fairness to people by public organizations needs to look. And that includes the delivery of services by TCHC to its tenants. Every tenant who deals with TCHC on any issue is entitled to 3 types of fairness: a fair process, a fair outcome, and fair treatment. What exactly that will look like will of course depend on the particular context or the decision being made, but the principle is always the same. Fair process includes things like explaining the rules to people, giving them an opportunity to be heard on decisions that affect them, and timely service. Fair outcome requires that staff make decisions in accordance with accepted policies and procedures that are well known, without bias, and based, of course, only on relevant considerations. And fair treatment means treating people, everyone, with dignity, respect, and care. It requires clear, 2-way communication, both listening to people and giving them the information they need, and accessible services. In terms of fair treatment, I just want to quickly mention the critical difference between equal treatment, which is not fair, and equitable treatment, which is. In this slide that you're looking at, equality is depicted on the left panel. And as you can see, one of the people is still unable to watch the game because of the brick wall blocking their view. Equity is depicted in the middle panel, with the same resources being thoughtfully distributed after considering each person's individual needs, and not just equally distributing them across the board. And the third panel is the aspirational one. It's designed to show that if we design our systems and processes thoughtfully from the beginning, with the goal of enabling everyone to fully participate, then we won't need extra things like the orange blocks to make things fair. Turning to the data in the report, this chart is found at page 5. The number of cases that we have handled relating to TCHC has increased dramatically over the last 5 years. In 2015, we received 184 complaints, but by 2019, that number had risen to 449. And also on page 5 of the report is a different chart that I've not reproduced here. And it shows that the number of complaints we receive about TCHC is dramatically higher than about any other city division, agency, board, or corporation that we oversee. In the past 3 years, 24% of all the cases we handled that were within our legal scope related to TCHC. And that's really significant when you think about the fact that my office oversees the entire city administration, including all 45 city divisions and almost all of the city agencies, boards, and commissions. Sorry, did I miss one? Excuse me, yes. This chart is on page 6 of the report, and it's also very significant. It shows that in more than half of the cases we received or complaints we got from TCHC tenants, the complaints were premature. We believe that TCHC and all of the organizations that we oversee have the responsibility and also deserve the opportunity to address their problems themselves before we become involved. It's actually a hallmark of Ombudsman work of all kinds that we are an office of last resort. In the case of TCHC, well over half the complainants that we hear from come to us before TCHC has addressed the issue that they're concerned about. And most often that's because tenants simply don't know how to get TCHC to address their issues, or they try to do that, but then they get no results. This chart, which is on page 7 of the report, shows you the topics of the complaints that we receive. As you can see, more than 1/3 are about maintenance issues. Data is really important, but as Professor Brene Brown says, stories are data with soul. And that's why in our annual report, we always include stories. I just want to give a little plug because as it happens tomorrow, our 2019 annual report is going to be released. And I encourage everyone to please take a few minutes to read it to better understand the types of problems that exist in the organizations that we oversee and also the types of impact that our work is having to help with those. In any event, I don't have time here to share stories with you, but I don't want you to think that the tenants are calling the Ombudsman about small things like leaky taps or sticky windows, because they're not. Some quick examples of maintenance issues that we heard about last year. Tenants complaining about no heat in their buildings for days on end in the dead of winter. In one case, an elderly couple with complex health challenges contacted us because their fridge had been malfunctioning and all their medication as well as all their food had been getting spoiled. This had continued despite TCHC having ostensibly repaired it 5 different times. In another case, where TCHC had told the tenant that it was his responsibility to take off bathroom tiles to find the source of a terrible odor, he found what he thought was black mold, and he had to wait over a month to have someone come and look at it. It turned out it wasn't black mold, it was actually solid waste, which had accumulated because the toilet had been improperly installed. And then it took many more months for him to get the situation resolved. Throughout this time, the family, which included elderly members and infants, had been inhaling the fumes. This chart shows our findings in terms of what kind of problems exist. And as you'll see, in more than half of the problems we found, there was poor communication at the root and at the center of what was going on. In fact, fully 70% of the problems we find involve either poor communication, delay, poor complaint handling, or some combination of those. And I encourage you to stop and think about that for a moment. There's a huge human cost to what we're talking about here. Each individual example is a real human story. These are situations that affect people's health, their safety, their security, and sometimes the question of whether they will even have a roof over their head at all. Not knowing who to go to with a problem or not getting a timely response can leave people stressed, anxious, and ill. I think we all know how hard it can be to raise a complaint about something, especially in a large organization. It's hard even if you're in good health, you're not living with a disability, you speak good English, you're well educated, you're stable socioeconomically, and you have no fear of reprisal for complaining. As we know, those circumstances are not the case with many of your tenants. And that's why having proper communication, proper opportunities for people to raise issues that are concerning them and to get timely and meaningful responses is so critically important. I think that this represents a tremendous opportunity for TCHC to serve people better by communicating clearly, which includes listening, as I've mentioned, and also giving people that they need information that they need promptly and in a way that they can understand it and use it. Sadly, I think that these findings show that this has not been happening to the level that the board should expect. I believe that this can be turned around with a commitment to training all TCHC staff at every level on how to provide good public service. So in conclusion, far too many complaints that come to my office about TCHC are premature, and this is largely because TCHC does not have a well understood complaints process. The most common problem we have found, as I said, is poor communication. Neither staff nor tenants at TCHC have a clear understanding of how TCHC handles complaints. They don't understand where they should be made, how they should be escalated if the tenant is not satisfied, with us at the very end of that process, and not partway through when the tenant gets understandably frustrated. It sounds simple, and it is simple, but it's absolutely critically fundamental to an organization that delivers service. My recommendation is that you as the board should satisfy yourself that management has developed and executed a detailed plan to effectively publicize its new internal complaints processes to all tenants, residents, staff, and members of the public who interact with the corporation. And secondly, that management has built a plan to provide all employees with training about how to provide good public service in which always communicating with tenants in a way that's timely, transparent, and fair is a critical bedrock. My team worked for a very long time, months and months and months with TCHC to ensure that they would develop a new internal complaints process. I'm very pleased that it's finally in place, and also pursuant to a suggestion from my office that there's a helpful button now on the website, which is a great thing for tenants to find information about how to make a complaint. But if the complaints process and the system for tenants to have their issues addressed is not clearly and broadly communicated throughout the organization to both tenants and staff, then all of that effort was for naught. You'll see as Appendix A to the report a memo to me from Mr. Marshman, where he outlined the steps that TCHC management has taken to start addressing some of these issues, and he's committed to the further steps that management will take to publicize the new complaints process and to provide the training on good public service that I feel is so critically important. I urge the board to take responsibility for ensuring that these two things happen. With that, I will conclude my presentation, but of course, I'm very happy to entertain any questions from the board. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
So thank you very much, Ombudsman. It feels weird calling you that because I've known you so long, but I do appreciate your report, and it can be sometimes difficult for organizations to hear challenging information, but I think it's an important part of the process of getting to a better result on the other side. So I appreciate your efforts with us, and importantly, your efforts with our organization to make it better. So thank you very much for that, because I know there's always that balance in an organization like yours between being an independent ombudsman and helping organizations be better, and we appreciate your efforts to help us. So with that, I'll look to
May I just quickly respond to that, Mr. Chair? I just want to say that it's our pleasure. And I also want to say that we always find TCHC management to be extremely cooperative with our work, very open to our advice and our investigations, and to allowing us to help them do their challenging work better. So I know I've delivered some hard to receive information this morning, but I do want to put it in that context.
Great, thank you. So board members, I see Debbie Douglas. John.
Thank you, Chair. Ombudsman, thank you for your report. This is very timely and quite thorough. One question, do you collect data based on race and gender and disability of complainants? And do you disaggregate that data and do you report out on it? From TCHC and or other folks in Toronto?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is something that we are currently exploring right now. We don't currently do that, but we have been looking at that for several months, and we may start doing that. I'd be interested to know whether TCHC collects such data in respect of its complaints as well.
Very good question, Ombudsman.
Tim?
Yeah, I thought, John?
Hi, Susan. That's an excellent report. Very, very valuable information. So I've got a couple of questions. Where is the central communication breakdown? Is it at the local level with the superintendent, or did you find it when they call head office to make a complaint?
I would say that there isn't a central place. It's pervasive. It's throughout. Tenants don't know where to go in the first place, and if they do go somewhere in the first place, they're often told it's not the right place, and then they have to go somewhere else, and then they have to repeat their story again, and then they're bounced to somewhere else, or they're told it's already been fixed when it hasn't been fixed. And it can be very, very demoralizing and discouraging to someone who's distressed by something to keep having to repeat it.
So you weren't the first person they called. They'd already tried TCHC, and they'd been thwarted with their efforts to get proper information and get the proper results.
Yes, absolutely. We are not the first person they call. What I'm saying though is that they should have a final answer from TCHC before they call us. And in many, many cases they don't, because they don't know how to get one. So
it's great to have a website, but not everybody wants to go online or has access to go online. In fact, probably, I don't know, maybe 20% of the people might be able to go online that are residents. So shouldn't there be some sort of permanent communication fixture in buildings? Or, I mean, it could even come down to fridge magnets or something like that. Now, the thing is that as an organization, you don't want to invite complaints. You don't want to just encourage complaints, but you do want to, of course, encourage as much open communication as possible. So aside from, so that people can freely approach the organization. So aside from, a button on a website, I mean, do you have any other effective tools that you would like to recommend or that you see as being optimal for residents?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I welcome this question. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I believe it would be fantastic if every single TCHC building had a locked glass cabinet with a bulletin board inside of it with essential communications for tenants in there. They couldn't be torn down, they couldn't get ragged around the edges, and you couldn't clutter it with all kinds of stuff. It would have to be the critical things that all TCHC tenants need to know. Everybody goes into the lobby of their building, so it would be accessible to everyone. It should probably be in several different languages. I mean, there are all kinds of communications issues associated with making it effective, but having it in a locked glass cabinet would go a long way. I just would like to also respectfully challenge something you said about not wanting to encourage complaints. I actually think that a good service organization does encourage complaints. I know complaints have a bad rap as being a negative thing, but I always encourage the organizations I oversee to try to flip that and say, if people complain, we can learn from the best possible source how we can serve them better.
Well, I think more what I meant is I would like them to try to resolve it locally with their superintendent before picking up the phone and escalating it, really. That's more really what I meant. But definitely, yes, people need to speak up. If the elevators are slow or not working, or there's no heat, or if there's garbage and dirt, absolutely they need to be able to speak up, and they need to be able to voice their concerns. It was just, what I meant is, like, not, you don't pick up the phone to call head office for, you know, every little thing. But I think the you know, that locked display case is a great idea. Thank you. So, Tim, with that, I'm sure other board members have comments and questions.
Thank you. Anyone? Linda? I see Linda and then Adele.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Thank you so much, Susan. You have a clarity that I really appreciate. I think I'm one of the longer standing members of the board. I just realized that recently. And I guess this is my message to the management team. I thank you for being always so open, because I have heard that previously, that generally actually reports like this are received well. But I guess now is the time for action. It just seems like this is really low hanging fruit in terms of actually, really implementing a system where people can come forward and raise their issues, and that we can respond to them. And I just really want the board to hold us accountable, and you accountable for making sure that we have these processes in place. I love the idea of actually something in every lobby as well.
Thank you. I don't think that requires a comment from you, no. Adele?
I also wanted to thank you for the report. I'm a new board. Information was really important to me. My question is Kevin, and I was wondering, Kevin, if he could speak to how the reorganization at TCHC will impact the complaints and the promptness of dealing with the complaints.
I'd be glad to, but I do note, I'd be glad to speak to it now, that we do have as item 3B, so immediately following this item, kind of our response to it and how we're addressing. So can we hold that item till then, Adele?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. And I'm also conscious, that we haven't heard the deputants yet, and I think it's important that we hear the deputants before we go into our presentation.
Yes, I agree with that. Thank you, Kevin. Any other board members? Yes, Councillor Baila.
Sorry, I was just having, I have a couple of questions for staff. So do you want me to put the questions now towards staff, or?
I think we should, I mean, if they relate to, so the good news is we have as the next item, the TCHC staff reporting on the new complaints process that it's putting in place, which I think was identified in the letter that Kevin sent to the Ombudsman, and I think is attached in the report. So I think it probably makes sense to deal with kind of TCH's response to this all in that one setting, and then we, so I think we should focus on further questions we have for the Ombudsman, then we can get to the deputant, and then we can have the staff tell us how they're responding to it.
Mr. Chair, at risk of upending your process, I just want to say I'm happy to stay on the call. And if somebody has a question for me in part 2 or part 3, either after the deputations or in the staff presentation, if it's obviously in your hands, Mr. Chair, but I'd be happy to address it then.
It would be great if you would, and I didn't want to presuppose that you would, but I very much appreciate it, and I'm sure people will be happy to hear your views as we go forward. Yes, Anna.
Mr. Chair, Councillor Fletcher was kicked out of the call, and so she was just calling me, and on her behalf, I'd like to have a motion to send the report to the Tenant Services Committee as well, so that further work can be done on the recommendation. So that the board accepts the recommendations and sends it to the Tenants Committee, so that further work can be done on this.
Okay. What do you want done with it at the tenant service scores?
I'm back.
Sorry about that, Paula. We were.
It's okay. I have 3 devices. I'm turning the other off. And I can't talk on. Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry. Before we, we'll come back to your point, Hannah, just because I think that's an amendment to the motion. Do you have a question for the Ombudsman, Paula?
Yeah, I do, but I'm just going to refer the Ombudsman's recommendations to the Tenant Services Committee.
It's amazing how coordinated you and Councillor Bailao are in that regard.
I had to text her and ask her to do that. I was off the call, but now I'm back. So I do have a question. Can you just go over that? And I appreciate that we haven't had this before, although certainly divisions at the city have had things looked into very deeply, and the Ombudsman's been clear that it's never easy. But on the issue with the sewage, where the toilet was put in improperly, and I would just, that to me is a pretty significant issue. I don't know how long it went on. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, if you don't mind. Normally you report out on, perhaps you could let us know, you report on one big thing that might have happened. And then you come back and say, this happened, here's all the details, and got to do X in the future so that doesn't happen again. I gather there's quite a few of these types of complaints, but I think it's helpful to look at that one thing and see, where did that break down? What point did that break down? And how long did it take you to get that sorted out?
I'll tell you the information that I have at hand on it. I don't have the file at my fingertips, but what I understand was that the complainant's elderly father had been complaining of a foul smell in the bathroom, and the tiles were unbalanced because of apparent water leaking. He notified management and was told that he had to fix the tiles at his own expense. The complainant removed 2 tiles and noticed black mold.
Management, who do you mean? I think.
No, I'm sorry. I'm reading a summary of the case. Removed 2 tiles, noticed black mold underneath the tiles, immediately contacted the management and the super, it says. It took more than a month to get someone to come to inspect while the foul smell continued. After the inspection, it was determined it was not mold, but solid waste that had accumulated due to the improper installation of the toilet a few years prior. Complainant's elderly parents and toddler are inhaling the substance every day. And this was a report from 2019. I'm sorry, I don't know when in 2019, but it says since October of 2018, the complainant has been furiously contacting management and TCHC, but the issue has not been fixed. So, I mean, let's assume for giving TCHC the benefit of the doubt that was a report from January of 2018. That was 3 months at least that this person was unable to get the problem fixed. I'm sorry, that's all the detail I have at the moment.
That's fine. And would you be all right with me referring your findings or your 2 recommendations to our Tenant Services Committee, where we can really have a good look, make sure, confirm that all the processes that management's putting in place will address a number of these things, plus get a few more details, which I don't know how deeply you went in with management, as to, are there certain places where this regularly falls apart? At what stage of the process does this normally fall apart? And can I ask you if you had a chance to look at the Easy Track regarding some of these, I'll just call them major ones, not a dripping faucet when you've got sewage backed up behind your wall, the Easy Track system and how well it's performing for these types of issues and getting at them?
My team always, ensures that there is an Easy Track number and that this matter is being tracked at TCHC. We haven't done a study of the Easy Track system and its effectiveness. I think that's really for TCHC to do primarily. In terms of your question about referring the matter to the committee, I think that sounds like very solid and sound board governance. If the board wants this to be looked at in more detail, more closely, and believes that committee is the place for that, then of course I think that's completely up to you and perfectly appropriate from where I sit.
Just one quick follow-up, which is on the Easy Track question, which isn't to have you review the efficiency of Easy Track, but whether or not in your, I guess this was an investigation or whatever you would call it, if it was that deep, or
inquiry, we call it. It's less formal. Yeah.
In your inquiry, you or you added in the easy track sequencing on this file? That was really my question.
I'm sure my staff probably did, but I don't have those details. There's a whole new process you're going to hear about momentarily called the Solutions Group. And I'm not even personally entirely sure how Easy Track and Solutions intersect, but I'm sure that Ms. Penny or somebody else can answer questions about that if you wish.
So this, thank you. And I'm sure that will also be a subject of discussion at the tenant service. So I don't know whether or not the whole thing should be referred to tenant services. So we are not approving something that we don't have aligned with this report and that we don't have enough. That's our job at tenant services, to make sure that all of the tenant related issues are going really well. So I'm happy to hear that. I just don't want to presuppose. I'll refer that as well, even if we're going to get that report. Thank you very much for looking into this, because we had asked, I think formally, that you had told us you want a report to TCHC. You don't want our staff reporting what you've said. So this is the first time you've directly come to do this, and it's very much appreciated, I think, by the board and I'm sure by management, because it's a good way to get things fixed up if they need fixing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other board members? Okay, so this was originally a motion to receive. It sounds like Councillor Fletcher wants to turn that into a motion to refer it to the Tenant Service Committee. So do we have a seconder for that?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, before the board considers this matter, we should hear from the deputants, and before the board rules on how it's going to resolve the matter, the deputants should be.
Oh yeah, it's fair point. Fair point. Yeah, fair point. So let's.
I do believe that we have made some improvement to the audio. If we can try again to join first Mr. Avila to the meeting so that he can make his deputation.
Thank you, Dara.
Sonia, can you join him?
Hello?
Mr. Avila?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello?
Yes,
Go ahead, Mr.
would you
Avila.
present your deputation?
Good morning.
Good morning. Please proceed.
Yes, good morning. Anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism is a huge concern for me. It's a huge concern for me. So I will be focusing on the CSU unit that is part of your organization. I am not strange to the office of the Ombudsman since 2009. There is a motion put forward by Councilor Bailao, and I don't know why, if you already made up your minds and you think that this will help to address the concerns that I just mentioned about anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism in your organizations. The recommendations are wonderful to have. I like the one that always recommends training and retraining with staff. I wonder, how is it going, by the way? How do we measure successful outcomes? All the recommendations are nice and good. Good work by the office of Susan Opler, if you're listening. By the way, you know that last Monday, executive committee, the mayor pointed out that when we talk about the recommendations to the TTC Commission with regards to the anti-racism strategy and the Ombudsman recommendations, he pointed out that without proper monitoring, these recommendations will fall again into a nice document, a nice thing to have in paper. So recommendations I put forward at the executive committee on Monday is that the TTC special constables and fair inspectors are equipped with body-worn cameras. I also am making the same recommendation to this board to equip CSE officers that you have hired recently 150 more. That is costing a lot of money to taxpayers, by the way. To equip them with body-worn cameras so that we can have proper accountability of and success of all these recommendations made by Susan Opler. And you know that the mayor supports in public the equipping TTC special constables. So I want to mention also, Kevin, I made the recommendations last year on December 13, 2019, when I addressed this matter, and I think Chief William Anderson was in attendance. And also one of the members of the board asked the same question about how are we doing to implement the anti-Black racism policy with TCHC? How do we measure success? So again, these TCHC special constables are now estranged to conflict and some abuses of authority. And you know that Susan Opler has been asked to investigate some racial profiling of officers of MLS in Etobicoke for compliance. That person, how is it going to evaluate if who is telling the truth or not if you don't have a video that records the audio, the interaction between the public and the officer? So we need to ensure accountability and ensure that we Toronto taxpayers are not hooked into paying the legal fees to cover the legal fees of our community safety unit officers when they are, going to court to file an allegation of abuse of authority. So a camera will ensure that we save taxpayers' money, and I'm sure that some of the board members will understand that. So before you make your vote in the recommendations by Councilor Ana Bailao, I want to suggest you a second sober opinion based on the meeting that we have at the executive committee that we discussed another report made by Susan Opler with regards anti-Black racism with the TCHC. So I want to recognize the work and effort that the corporation is making to ensure that we have a complaint process, and it's true that it's not clear how it's being delivered to each building. And we hope to move forward with positive changes as we implement the hub service delivery models. That will be a good place to start proving that these experiments are going to work for the best outcomes and the best service for all residents. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Any board members have a comment?
Thank you very much. Any board members have a comment?
Okay, Dara, do we have it?
I'm sorry, Tim. I really just wanted to thank Mr. Avila for continuing to bring forward the concerns that we all have about anti-Black racism and holding the board and TCHC as well as the City of Toronto to account. I absolutely agree with you. It's not only about collecting data, it's not only about putting training in place, but it's about tracking and ensuring that the outcomes that we're looking for are being met. And if they're not being met, to course correct so that we are seeing the kinds of systemic changes that we're looking at. I think the Ombudsman, I believe the Ombudsman's presentation showed well the track that we're on to move from equal treatment to the elimination of all systemic barriers. So thank you very much, Mr. Villa, for your deputation this morning.
Thank you. Any other?
Back, a lag. Something wrong with
Paula?
There's something terribly wrong.
Yeah, I think it's our connection to the outside line, I think, has got a long feedback loop in it.
Dara is taking a look to try and rectify that.
I think it stopped at this stage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other? Right, so do we have a second deputation?
Yes, we have a second deputant in relation to this matter, Mr. Walid Kugali.
We have a second deputation.
Can you folks hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Walid Kogali Ali, and I am here to depute in support of some of the recommendations made by the Ombudsperson, but also to highlight some concerns that have not been addressed. So I would
Hang on, Mr. Kigali, sorry, we're having a serious feedback problem on our end, so it's difficult to hear you, so we're just trying to fix this, so if you give us a second.
Dara's just off getting that rectified. You think we've got it solved?
I think we've got it solved.
Okay, we think we've got it solved. Mr.
Ali, are you there?
If you would like to proceed?
Hopefully we didn't solve it by hanging up on him.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you can, Mr. Kigali. Yeah, you
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better, and you should please feel free to start again.
Okay, thank you so much. So first of all, I just want to thank members of the board and the Ombudsperson for her report and recommendations, thoughtful report and recommendations that actually capture my experiences as a community organizer working in Regent Park, supporting tenants in St. Jamestown as well as Moss Park. And what I'd like to do is highlight some of the concerns that have not been addressed and also share with the board the sort of advice on the importance of senior management to respond to concerns, specific systemic concerns that have come from the community. But before I get started, I just wanted to acknowledge that there was communication sent to you folks prior to this meeting. I believe yesterday, a letter from the Black Legal Action Center, which speaks to some of those concerns that I will raise, as well as correspondence between myself and the current CEO and president, Mr. Kevin Marshman, that sum up the communication between May 25th, May 28th, and June 11th of this year. So with regards to the general concerns, there is a culture of intimidation and fear within TCHC. So what I would like to just make clear is that complaints shouldn't just be made by tenants, but also members of the public. I witnessed that culture of fear and intimidation when I was supporting my neighbors at 295 Shooter Street on May 7th, basically earlier this year, last month. And a lot of tenants had a lot of concerns, and some of them were also ongoing concerns with regards to the status of the units, some of which were a health hazard, specifically the clear evidence of what's the word? Of basically bacteria, moth or other bacteria within the units that were completely not safe, that made those complaints to folks at TCHC with little recourse. I also want to point out that those complaints, which are very difficult to sometimes communicate due to systemic barriers, for example, not knowing where to complain, how to complain, what is the response rate for complaint, and so that you're able to distinguish when the process has been followed and when there have been exceptions to that process that could invite more investigation. None of that has been communicated to tenants. The other piece that really concerns me as a member of the community is that the bureaucratic process that's in place is making it very difficult for many folks to complain. And what's worse is the lack of response from senior management, especially the management that's responsible to pursue the remedies that have been identified through whatever process the TCHC comes up with. So that's something that I'm actually very concerned about, is how can folks trust the senior management when there's lack of response or there's demonstration of oversight when it pertains to the concerns and complaints that have been put forward. I would like to point to the fact that there is concerns that stem from not just one experience. I've had experiences with my neighbors at 295 Shooter Street, but as well as 200 Wellesley. I've tried to communicate those concerns multiple times, and I have not received any meaningful response from senior management of TCHC. Let's not forget that there are other folks who are in more contact with tenants that are equally responsible to respond to concerns or complaints. What's one of the most deeply concerning one was the attempt by members of senior management to stop me from advocating on behalf of my neighbors by communicating that I was banned from Toronto Community Housing Unit. I've never been banned from any public spaces. I was deeply concerned by the attempts to gaslight me, to threaten me, and this was made by a senior member of TCHC. So I want that to be on the record.
Yeah, so thank you. Your time for this deputation has expired. I think you are up one more time, but I'd ask the board if any of the members have a question or comment for you in response to your deputation. Debbie Douglas.
Mr. Kogali, thank you for your presentation this morning. What, in your view, would be a suitable resolution to the concerns that you've raised over the last few weeks? I'm one of the board members that have been copied on your correspondence with senior management at the corporation.
Thank you, Ms. Douglas. The recommendations that I have put forward by email is what I'm hoping the board will act on, which is an investigation into the actions of TCHC staff that were responsible for supporting and relocating the displaced residents on Thursday, May 7th at the Moss Park Apartments located at 295 Shooter, that a public statement outlining the outcome of the investigation, disciplinary actions been taken, and what steps TCHC and the city will take to ensure that no family or individual is left without accommodations after a fire that has devastated their current accommodations. I think that will boost confidence in TCHC and in the city's response because it's a joint responsibility as well when it pertains to ensuring that residents are supported after a crisis or a tragedy. And also, I would like a correction of the public statement that was issued by TCHC on Tuesday, May 12, 2020, or a retraction of the inaccurate depiction in the statement that communicated that tenants were all supported. In my correspondence, I referenced the tenants that were moved to 275 Shooter to a dirty common space, that they were not provided the support that was publicly announced by TCHC when they were interviewed by City TV. So that's something that I would like action on when it pertains to the board's response to the systemic neglect of tenants at both 295 Shooter and 200 Wellesley.
Thank you. Thank you for your clarity.
Any other member of the board? No. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kayali. So with that, I think, Dara, we can return to the motion, which is, I guess, Councillor Fletcher's officially via Councillor Bailão to refer the report of the Ombudsman to the Tenant Service Committee for its review and action as it deems appropriate, or something like that.
Sorry,
Paula?
my motion. Mr. Chair, I can't figure out how to get my hand up to ask a question, so I apologize. I just have to jump in. But it is to refer the recommendations in the Ombudsman's report.
To the Tenant Service Committee.
Right. Which means.
Yeah, okay.
Do those. Thank you.
Is there, I assume, is there a seconder for that?
I'll second Debbie Douglas.
Okay, seconder Debbie Douglas. All those in favor?
So I see in favor, I see Brian Smith, I see Adele Imrie, I see Debbie Douglas, I see Linda Jackson, I see Councillor Bilau, I see Amanda Coombs, I see John Campbell, I see Nick McCrae, I see Councillor Paula Fletcher, and I see Uba Farah. In favor, the motion passes unanimously to refer the recommendations in the report to the Tenant Services Committee.
Great, thank you. So I think we can go to 3B. Obviously, Susan, if you want to stay around, we'd be pleased to have you and as a participant in this process, and I thank you for your time and patience. So with that, I'll turn 3B over to, is it to Scott, Kevin, or who is carrying this?
It's actually, excuse me, it's actually Sheila that is our Chief Operating Officer that's going to carry this.
We also have, Mr. Avila has identified that he would like to depute in relation to this matter. Is Mr. Avila in the call, and can he depute at this time?
Hello, I'm here.
Please proceed.
Here. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, please proceed, Mr. Avila.
Okay. So again, thank you for the opportunity to address the board on this second item of the day. I just want to point it out that I have sent my written deputations of the previous item and this item to the attention of the board so that they can be educating on the issue anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism. Also, I'm glad that Susan Opel is on the phone because I have asked the board about the upcoming elections to replace the tenant board members, directors. I think their term has expired, and I sent an email to the board secretary to regard my inquiry. I have not received a reply on this matter. Secondly, I want to say, Kevin, it's been nice to meet you. I heard that you're leaving us, and I hope that your replacement become a catalyst for change for the organization. All right, so back to the item. Thank you for improving the online deputation. I pointed out to you in previous emails that 2 minutes was unfair for many deputants to summarize everything in 2 minutes. Where with this incorporation of extra time, that allows for the flow of democracy. All right, so the complaint process. 220 Oak Street is about to be blessed with a hub service delivery model. And some of the recommendations that I heard today from Susan is improve the bulletin board. All right, the bulletin board is an item that should be removed and is replaced with digital monitoring. A digital monitor like is found in many lobbies at private condominiums. Private condominiums have the luxury of being informed to the residents via a monitor. So that information flows regularly, and perhaps that's a way to improve the system.
Mr. Avila, hang on a sec, please.
Hello,
sorry.
I'm talking.
Yeah. No, we'll stop your time. We'll pause your time.
I'm talking.
Sorry, Paula?
You haven't up this time.
I know. Yeah, I know. Well, it was 2:48.
Can you not pause it?
Yeah, I know. Well, it's 2:48.
Okay, now we're getting horrible feedback again.
What?
It was actually was it okay? We're okay now. Yes, Paula.
I'm just asking, Mr. Chair, could you ask the deputants to simply address the reports that are in front of us and any specific pieces of that report? Because I'm not, they're addressing, we're on the staff report. We've dealt with the Ombudsman's report now, and we're on the staff report. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure Mr. Avila have heard that, but I'm happy to alert him to that fact as well. So can we get Mr. Avila back on and start his clock again?
Happy to alert him to that fact as well. So can we get Mr. Avila back on and start his clock again? Happy to alert him to that fact as well. So can we?
Well, I'm talking on the matter, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, if you could address the tenants complaint process update, that'd be great. Go ahead.
If you could address the tenants complaint process update, that'd be great.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So this complaint process is first management needs to reroute complaints. So this complaint process is first management needs to reroute complaints. The real problem is that tenants cannot access this process until after they have tried to solve it locally. So it begs the question, what the hell is the process in Thailand to resolve complaints at the local level? It seems to be very depending on who you ask, making it subject to staff interpretation. Tenant complaint forms were removed last year from lobbies. No discussion, no direction on how tenants can complain locally. Not under the old structure and not under the new hub model. Tenants do not want to dial a call center to discuss personal issues, nor should they be required so. More recently, I heard that tenants have to go through the CSU officer. Now that is a scary stuff. So I'm talking again about this complaint process. They need to be properly put on for the public to see. I will also reiterate about the tenant charter that we work with several tenants across the portfolio to incorporate ways to address our differences between staff and residents, how we should behave each other, how we should get along with each other is difficult. Even at this board, I'm being stopped to speak. This is a constant trend by Councillor Fletcher. I will request that Councillor Fletcher stop me from speaking. This is very inappropriate and unprofessional, and I won't be hesitate to complain to the Ombudsman about it. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you very much. So with that, can we, any questions for Mr. Avila?
Thank you very much.
Okay, seeing none, we'll, can we turn off the external?
I have a question.
Oh, sorry, Paula, go ahead.
Somebody tell me how to get my hand up on here, so I'm not having to scream at everybody every time I need to get in there. I can't.
There's a chat function as part of WebEx, and if you put your, it should come up as, yeah.
I understand, but it doesn't work for me. I'm just letting you know that I can't type in when I'm on the iPhone, and I'm on the iPhone. So technology. So I apologize for having to burst in that way. My question is, I think Mr. Avila said something about the complaints process, that tenants have to go through a CSU officer, and I would like him to explain that a little bit further as to what he understands that, what's happening in that way, what point that happens.
I don't know, is Mr. Avila still on the line?
I think he may have hung up.
Okay, then that'll be a staff question about that. Or we'll hear more about that when this goes to tenant services too. I'm sorry, this is so frustrating for everybody, these online meetings.
Okay, so let's go to 3B, and Sheila, I think it's your show, so away you go. Are you talking? Can't hear you. Hello? Paula, do you want to put yourself on mute? Thank you. Okay, well, now we can't hear head office. Sheila, are you? We can't hear you, so can't hear Kevin. I guess they're trying to fix it.
Does everybody remember those old mobile phones that were like a shoe sitting on your ear?
I can see Sheila, but
Yes. No, I know. We can see her. We can't hear them. Yes, we do. I remember the Cantel Rogers Network.
And this
Done.
and now
Okay. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So we will make adjustments in the next meeting to make sure that we can get this, there's switching back and forth that needs to happen on this, and it's kicking us out sometimes. So we'll make sure that we get that fixed. What we will ask the deputies, you'll notice you're hearing kind of a repeat, when some of the deputies have been speaking. And what Dara and I figure that is they've got the audio on, because there's a delay in the live stream. And so what you're hearing is the live stream in the background of it. So when they are speaking, we will ask them to mute their live stream, and that should take care of a big piece of that problem. So Charmaine is now shared the content, and I'm going to turn it over to Sheila, and we will certainly answer any of the questions that have been raised as we go through it. Sheila?
Good morning. So I would like to start by thanking the Ombudsman for her presentation today. For a couple of reasons. Number one, as she notes in her report, complaint trends can be a valuable tool for identifying systemic problems and continuously improving the public services TCHC provides to its tenants. So this information that the Ombudsman has shared with us will be a good baseline for the company to measure itself against as we implement changes with the complaints process and just generally through restructuring as we move to decentralize and bring service closer to tenants. The Ombudsman also points out in her report that publishing detailed complaint trends about a single organization outside of their annual report is exceptional. And we have asked for this information to come along with the board to a public forum so that we can be fully transparent around the issues that the company has and work through the Tenant Services Committee to implement the changes that we're making through restructuring, but also to continually report on those changes and improve them as we go forward. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history. Back as far as 2002, the company did establish a complaints policy, and those complaints, the way that system worked, a tenant would make a complaint, the complaint would be escalated one level up. If that complaint wasn't resolved, tenant would have to reassert the complaint. It would be escalated the next level up and so on and so forth through the organization, culminating with the CEO. As the Ombudsman pointed out, and we've all experienced this, there is nothing more frustrating when you're making a complaint than having to continually repeat that story. And the model that we're implementing through the restructuring with the tenant service hubs, a prime deliverable that we're seeking to take across the company is first point of contact resolution. So that's a little bit of background on the complaints process. If I can move to the next slide, please. So back in 2018, late 2018, the Ombudsman's office flagged to us concerns about our complaints process, both with regards to awareness and effectiveness. We worked very closely with staff in the Ombudsman's office to put in place a new complaints process as part of the restructuring. Late in 2019, we formed a group called Solutions, which is embedded within the call center. That team has 6 staff members who are there to respond to mine the data that exists in the Easy Track system, pull together a history so that management can make a recommendation and respond to the complaint. When a complaint is registered, the service level that we have established for the solutions team is that they respond back to the tenant within 24 hours with an Easy Track tracking number and provide a written form of communication around the complaint issue back to the tenant within 7 days. We have posted that explanation of the complaints process on our website. We did have some suggestions on how to improve that through the Ombudsman's office by making it on the front page with a button tagged on every page in the website. We've done that as well. We have drafted a process on complaints that will be placed in a lock cabinet in every building. We had planned on rolling that out in mid-March. COVID intervened, and those posters will be going out in July. So every building will have a poster under in a locked cabinet in the lobby space of every building. The cabinets exist today, and we'll rearrange the material in them to include this information. We have also made the complaints process available on social media. Obviously, we have more work to do there. If I can move to the next slide, please. So as I said, the solutions team, it's a single-stage escalation model managed by that 6-person team. The solutions team can be accessed by mail, email, phone. We have an online form. Complaints that are escalated to Kevin's office and my office are also rerouted to Solutions. Solutions, as I said, respond in 24 hours with a tracking number, an initial contact, and provide that written response within 7 business days. I and Kevin receive a weekly report from the complaints data set for review, and we are working hard with that team around the resolution component of the complaint to make sure that when that resolution goes back to the tenant, it is in fact resolution and not just a referral to another group. I could have the next slide. So our next steps, obviously you've heard quite clearly that our process is not well known. As I said, that poster is going out. We are also, as one of the deputants noticed, we are in the very early stages of implementing the tenant service hubs. So as you know, we've decentralized to 3 regions, 83 tenant service hubs across the portfolio with the intention of improving first contact resolution and a place for tenants to receive in-person service to respond to concerns. There were some delays in the rollout of the tenant service hub model, but the staffing is in place, and we are moving through an exercise now called hub simulations with those frontline teams, where we take common concerns that tenants have, and with that frontline team, work through the issue to come up with what is a good response, document that, and put it out for all staff in a hub playbook. So we have been delayed somewhat in the in-person service delivery model that we're driving towards, but the staffing is in place, the hubs are being formed, and we will work hard through the Tenant Service Committee to report on our ongoing progress and to ensure that tenant complaints are heard and addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. So, board members, do you have any comments, questions?
It's Brian.
Go ahead, Brian.
I guess, there's a lot and it's hard to digest, and I'm sure it's difficult for tenants. I wonder whether you could provide a flow chart of how this process would work so that we could all see the steps that take place in the process. And I wonder whether a flow chart might be easier for people to comprehend. Sometimes it's hard to wade through the verbal, as correct as it is, but maybe a more pictorial kind of presentation would help us understand where there may be blockages in the future, where significant information should be collected, and how we would access that information in a summary form so we can track it as we go forward.
So I'd be happy to provide that at the first opportunity through the Tenant Services Committee. It will be a living document that we initiate, and as I've said a couple of times, work with tenants, with committee to continuously improve. So I think that's a good suggestion, Director.
Yeah, so Sheila, it's Tim here. My only thought is there's actually 2 points to the process. One of this is tenant facing and what they need to do to understand. And the other is us as a board and learning from the process. So I think, because Brian mentioned both tenants and us understanding the process, but they're actually different responsibilities. Yeah. So I think there's one about what we need to do to understand how it works from a systemic level. And tenants may also want to know that, but they'll certainly want to know how it works from, who do I call and what happens. And so I'm wondering, I apologize, I'm going to do this chair prerogative, I guess, but can you describe for me, if I'm a tenant under the new solutions process and I go to my super or just give me an example of how it works if I'm a tenant and what, who do I tell my story to? What happens? What do I hear? Pretend you're a tenant and tell me what happens.
So if I'm a tenant and I have a concern, my first point of contact with that concern in most instances is the superintendent, who resolves those issues, hopefully for me. If I have a complaint, which is different than a service request, I call the call center. I can send an email to the call center. I can refer my complaint by mail, by phone. The complaint is received by the solutions team within the call center. They're dedicated and there to receive the complaint, to respond within 24 hours back to the tenant with a tracking number, then to pull the data that exists around the complaint from the EasyTrack system, move the complaint to the right source within the company to have it resolved, and then report back to the tenant with that resolution. So from a tenant perspective, we're trying to make it simple. If you have a complaint, you go to the call center either by phone, by mail, email. You will get a tracking number on your complaint, and then it's up to the company to resolve that complaint and respond back to you.
Okay, and the notion, so from the tenant's perspective, then the key bit is I need to know the call center, so that's the information process that you're putting in place, is to identify for tenants that the place to go is this call center in whatever form they can get to it. And that from our perspective, and what we need to communicate is obviously they tell that story to the call center once, and thereafter they don't need to tell it again because they've been given a tracking number, and that tracking number is the surrogate for their story, and whoever interfaces with them from that point will have that tracking number with their story, so they don't have to tell it again.
That's correct. That's the goal.
Sorry, I jumped over the queue on some directors, but if any other, I see from our chat that there's some, I think Adele, you have a question.
I do. The Ombudsman provide good public service. So could you speak ask of this?
You were cutting in and out, Adele. Do you want to try again?
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So Sheila, the Ombudsman also spoke about training for staff regarding providing good public service. Can you speak to us about what training is being provided?
So we are providing training through restructuring, obviously starting with the solutions team, the client care, first response team, but also to the frontline integrated teams that will be working out of the hubs locally to respond on a daily basis to regular service requests from tenants. So there is training that is happening in the call center, in the solutions team, at the frontline service area through the integrated tenant service hub team, and then the management team that supports them. So training's being provided, and a document is well on its way to being drafted called a hub playbook that sets out for staff how to respond in a whole series of tenant-facing situations. So there's a number, there's a number of layers of training that is currently underway and being planned.
Okay, so I have Paula, then Amanda is next, then John.
Thank you. I just wondered if we can just put this in a time frame that there was the major reorg took place in, was it September 2018?
September 2019.
Oh, sorry, 19. I did mean 19, but I slipped by a year. 2019. And out of that reorg, a number of these processes were put in place, correct?
They're being put in place.
So I think it would be very helpful if we were to have a lens when we have this discussion. I am moving this to tenant services so we can have a deeper conversation to be really clear on if our new model is how well aligned we are with the focus on tenants, which is why we moved to that very new model. And we want to make sure that that the reorg, which was done to make things better, is successful, and this component is highly successful. I think you'd agree with me there. I just don't know if we're able to have any actual facts on how easily things have been considered or problems have been solved, or if the new structure is adding to satisfaction for tenants at this juncture. So is there a line we could draw and say we're looking at this pre-X date and post-X date? And that's really my question. Or is that impossible?
So I think as part of, pardon me, as part of the restructuring process that we presented to the board, we talked about implementing what are called service quality indicators, where at a building level, staff assess the level of service that they believe they're providing. We need tenant leadership in place. There's a report coming a little further on in the agenda on our plans to conclude the tenant election. With tenant leadership in place, it's our plan by the end of 2020 at a building level to have tenant leadership provide us with the service that they're experiencing within that building, cleaning, maintenance, tenancy management, community safety and support, so that we can see where the gaps are, where staff believe that they are providing a level of service that isn't being acknowledged by the tenant community, so that we can understand where those gaps are and put plans in place to rectify it. So I would say, Councillor, that will be the board's best lens into how the company is actually doing at meeting the needs of tenants on a building by building basis.
Yes, we know I have some issues with the whole tenant elections and how that's been rolled out, and I have some experience there I'd like to share. But I also have some confidential questions about this, which would be helpful, I guess, when we go in private, back into I think we have to go back, do we not, Mr. Chair?
No, we concluded the confidential session.
Well, then we'll do that when we go, when I read. I'm going to refer this as a companion piece, and I guess I can do that confidentially at the next meeting. Unless we go confident, we may end up in a session out of one of these issues anyway today, in which case, thank you. I'm just alerting you. Thanks.
Yeah, we may, we'll see how much time we have. Amanda next.
I just wanted to know what happens when tenants receive an easy track number and their complaint or the service that they're requesting is still not being handled. Because as a tenant representative, I've had many residents tell me that they have called the call center and they requested services to be done to their units. They've received an easy track number, and all the easy track number is a way for the representatives on the other line to know that the time and the date that they issued their complaint or made a service request. And sometimes they can keep calling and calling and calling, and that complaint or service that they're asking to be handled. Happens when weeks go by, months go by, they call and they keep in that easy track number. And
So we just lost.
No, I think the question was that they get an easy track number, but what happens when they don't feel there's progress on the easy track on their issue? And so, yes, they have an easy track number, but it's 2 months in and the situation has changed. From a tenant's perspective, what is the fact that they have an easy track number? Like, how do they advance the ball at that point if it's 2 months in and they don't feel satisfied? Yes, they have an easy track number and that's a tracking benefit, but it doesn't equal a resolution benefit. And so how is that going to be dealt with? And how does a tenant, from a tenant perspective, how do they make sure that it's being driven towards a resolution that's satisfactory to them? And is there a next step?
So if tenants are making requests through the call center and getting easy track numbers to have routine service requests dealt with and they're not getting service, then they would register a complaint. So they would register a complaint, it would go to Solutions, who would pull the data, a summary form to the general manager. What are we going to do about this? And it's up to the general manager to resolve the issue. If the tenant isn't satisfied with the written response that they get to the complaint within 7 days, it would go directly to the general manager.
Thank you.
They would escalate the complaint beyond Solutions to their GM.
Thank you.
Did you talk about the reporting?
So I will, maybe I didn't make it clear, but Kevin and I do receive a weekly report that comes out of Solutions with the number of complaints that have come in and what the resolutions have been, so that we can flag for our team if we see things that we don't think have been addressed properly as well.
Great, thank you. The one question I have in follow-up is, so what counts for our solutions process as a final outcome so that then it's appropriate for, so Susan Opler isn't saying this is premature. So what do we count as final so that then it's appropriate if they're still dissatisfied that the Ombudsman gets involved?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Sorry, Jim. Maybe I'm being thick here.
You know, maybe
My sense is Susan Opler understands the question.
I do, but that doesn't help getting us an answer. The question is this. We are the Office of Final Resort. It's important for tenants to know that once TCHC has given a final response as an organization to their complaint, if they're not satisfied or they feel that that response is unfair, they can come to my office. I think the question that the chair was asking is, what is that final response from TCHC? Where does that come from? And when does the tenant know that that's the end of the road at TCHC on this complaint and my only further recourse is to take it to the Ombudsman?
We issue a summary document that explains what the complaint was, what actions we have taken, how we are unable to respond in the way that the tenant would request. So we issue a summary statement.
Is that after review by the general manager?
Correct.
So the final word, as it were, lies with the general manager. The tenant then receives something in writing outlining the decision and the reasons for the decision, which puts my staff in a very good position to evaluate whether there was a fair process, a fair outcome, and fair treatment. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. That was my question in that. So, because I think that's important for us organizationally and for the Ombudsman, because if you look at the Ombudsman report with half of them being premature, I think, if we can get rid of premature complaints, we're already significantly reducing the workload of the office and the frustration of tenants. So I think that's something, as we think about communicating our process, we need to be clear about what counts as, quote, final as well, so that we cut down on confusion around that issue. So that's just something to flag, and maybe that's something that can be followed up on in the Tenant Service Committee, assuming that passes. So I think I had John and then Anna. You're on mute, John.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Sheila, question for you. Is it a reasonable assumption that the very first point of contact when something's gone wrong in a building is the superintendent?
Correct. If it's a service request, if the toilet doesn't work or they're not happy with temperature in the building or hot water, they would go to the superintendent for.
Right. So Susan reported that most of the complaints that eventually get to her, and it's probably the same with our process, deal with maintenance issues. So if a resident goes to a superintendent with a maintenance issue that lingers, is there a requirement that the superintendent log or report every complaint that comes to he or she?
So there's a difference, if I could, there's a difference between a service request and a complaint, right? We receive thousands of service requests every day. A complaint is when there is an issue with the service. And so through the solutions team, we're providing for tenants a single point of contact for them to escalate a concern quickly when they have an issue. And that complaint goes from the solutions team. They'll make sure it goes to the right body in the company who has oversight to provide direction to that superintendent to improve the service and that it gets resolved.
John, if I could add just on this, I think without trying to make this overly complicated, in the normal course of events within, a building, I'm a tenant and I have an issue, whatever, a maintenance issue. I've got an issue with in the bathroom or whatever that needs to get resolved. Go down to I talk to the superintendent who creates a work order. The work gets done. They still haven't fixed the problem. I would, in the normal course, generally speaking, I think we would all just kind of go to the superintendent and say, we need this resolved, it's still not fixed, and expect to get that done in the normal course. What we're talking about here in the complaints process is if that, element of it fails, not that we're trying to create all work orders up through a centralized organization that's supposed to be addressing complaints. And so I think that's where we're trying to be, where there's a breakdown in things occurring in the normal course of events, that's where we want to make sure that we are addressing these. And to the point, that the Ombudsman made, that a number of these things really hadn't been fully resolved by TCHC, before it got raised to her office, to really kind of focus on making sure that we've done, we've got to that final report that we talked about that Susan said would provide her team with fair means of assessment.
Is there room for improvement in the manner in which we supervise our superintendents and evaluate our superintendents?
So I would say when we are trying to improve service to an organization, there's always room for improvement. And that's one of the reasons that we put the service quality indicators in place.
Yeah.
And I take it off the superintendents per se and put it on how is the team supporting, the building? So it's not just the superintendents, there's cleaners, there's maintenance people, there are tenant service coordinators, as well. So I just, the point being, what we're looking at is we're trying to get some objective measures that really have an indication in terms on a building by building basis how we are performing.
The quality of service.
Right.
Okay. All right. That's all. Thanks, Tim.
Okay. So I have Anna, Linda, Brian, and Debbie. Anna.
Do we get any information, any reports on your monthly report on this solutions? Have you started reporting back to the board on this or no?
No, we have. I think in terms of the service quality indicators, Anna, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we have not yet started reporting back to the board on that yet.
So we have on the service quality indicators, we have the staff assessment of the services that they're able to provide. We've gathered them from 416, so that would be your supers, DMP1s, cleaners. We are in the process of just concluding the service quality indicators with 79 staff, so more around rent, access and support, community safety.
Yeah, but we're not getting
the feedback from tenants. We need the tenant leadership in play. We need to have individuals nominated that have a leadership capacity in each building so we can go to them and say, you rate the service that you are receiving at a local level in your building.
Yeah, but I think it would be complementary for the kind of information that we also know how many complaints we're getting through this solution.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, let's ask the tenants, but it's also an indicator to understand what kind of complaints we're getting in there. How are you, I mean, we have a very diverse set of tenants that we serve. So how are you dealing with the language in terms of promotion and in terms of access to this complaint process? How are you dealing with language?
So we have access to a group called 911 interpreters. So if I am a tenant, I make a request, I say Spanish, the call center agent or the CSC, the TSC, whoever is taking the call from the tenant accesses this online phone service, gets the interpreter, and then it's a three-way call between the tenant, the interpreter, and the agent or staff member that's speaking with the tenant.
So our solutions team does that. So I can call and speak in Spanish and make my complaint. Have we promoted that as we're promoting solutions, that this is a service offered in, I don't know how many languages? And have we promoted the solution itself in different languages to our different communities as well?
So we are in the process. There's a document, a pamphlet, a handout for tenants on solutions, and we are in the process of translating that into 18 languages so that it's available as a handout locally within the building. We haven't distributed that yet. The posters will be going up in July, and we'll make sure that the translation is clear in the handout and on the poster.
Can you also comment on the recommendation by the Ombudsman on us having a locked information board in all of our buildings, so we have this kind of information always available in our lobbies?
So we actually have now in place in every building a locked bulletin board that this poster will be going into.
Okay. Thank you.
I have Linda next, then Brian.
I'll be brief because Anna, you actually raised a lot of the questions that I had about the locked cabinets and actually translation. And I think I would love from the tenant services to actually see those posters so that we know what they look like. I'd also like to suggest that we actually do have data that is coming to tenant services that gives us an indication of this. And Sheila, I'm curious, do you feel confident that we can actually reduce, like it really stands out that we are the agency that has the lion's share of the complaints, and that communication and maintenance, it's kind of, we know where the sweet spots are that we need to improve in. Do you feel confident in the new structure that we will be able to address this within the next 6 months to a year?
So I am confident in the new structure. As you know, this is a complex company and we serve a complex client base, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
Right? It takes time and dedication and commitment to go. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon that we are involved in. And, you know, I appreciate that the restructuring was approved 9 months ago, and 9 months seems like forever. But I would say to really get the hubs up and running, staff trained, playbook in hand, good communications, we're at least 12 months away from that.
That's fair, Sheila, and I think that this might be an indicator. If we track this closely, this might be an indicator that your structure is working or not, and that we just actually use it. I actually think that that's fair. I'd rather us stick to something. We tend to actually flit from one thing to another, and I have confidence in your structure as well. But I think we should really be watching this as an indicator that it's working. Because I think that this could make a really big difference in culture if people felt that they were responded to. Thank you, Sheila.
Great, thank you. Brian, Debbie, then Amanda.
Thanks. I just want to say that the detail I expect management to deal with. What I want is to know what we're going to measure and to know that, in fact, things are moving in the right direction. And I mean, there are a myriad of things that management, I'm sure, have ideas in terms of how to improve. But ultimately, we need to measure what outcomes we want and be able to have that reported to us on a regular basis. And I'd like the Tenant Services Committee to look at that, not the process, because ultimately the staff have to design the process that is going to deliver. But I would like to know the things we want to measure, the outcomes, you know, the number of requests for maintenance. Has the tenant signed off that they've been done satisfactorily? Has it been done in 30, 90, or 100 days? You know, what is the time? I think that's what we should be focused on, setting those parameters to measure, because the staff are ultimately the ones that know the challenges and have to design the process. But we need to measure the outcomes to know whether staff have delivered the right systems to accomplish what we want. Thank you.
And certainly, Brian, I think that the service quality indicators, you know, are an element of that. And why don't, at the upcoming Tenant Services Committee, why don't we bring a dashboard or a scorecard, you know, that would frame the items that we're going to track.
Yeah, no, that would be great, because I mean, you know the challenges that as Sheila said, you know, I mean, it's a very complex organization, and you know, there's a whole range of things I'm sure you might implement in order to improve systems, but ultimately, my perspective in getting back to Tim's nose and fingers, I want to know the outcomes and to know that those are achieving the goals we want to accomplish for the tenants.
Yep.
Okay, so I think I have Debbie and Amanda left, and then probably it sounds like there's a consensus around kind of what sending this and the Ombudsman report to the Tenant Service Committee for follow-up, including looking at this issue. But so maybe I can alert Dara to kind of think about what that motion looks like while we go to Debbie and Amanda.
I won't be long, Tim, because Anna raised a question I had around language access. I wasn't sure, though, if we raised the question about whether the recommendation from the Ombudsman about a written process and the tracking of it that some of my colleagues on the board had suggested. Will that be in multiple languages as well, Sheila? I may have missed your response to that. I also want to take this opportunity to remind us that the same way that I've asked the Ombuds person, Susan's office, to begin to collect disaggregated race, disability, and gender-based in terms of complainants, that her question back to me was absolutely correct. Is TCHC also doing so? So Sheila, any plans? And I know you would expect you to work in conjunction with your other colleagues in senior management, but what are your plans in terms of being able to track the complaints based on the complainant? I think it's important for us to know if there are areas or communities that are feeling that they're not being heard and or their issues are not being followed up on. I know every meeting I will, and you will know every meeting I will continue to raise the issue for the need to collect disaggregated data, because if we don't count it, we don't address it.
Understood. And I believe that our best opportunity to do that is at a building level, to know the makeup of who our tenants are within that building, and then we'll be able to answer the question, are there groups of tenants in a building that are not being served appropriately, and we'll get that information through their service quality indicator.
It would be good, because just to underscore Linda's point in terms of summaries of complaints coming to the Tenants Committee, I would want included in that summary the groups of folks where we're seeing complaints and complaints that continue to go on, taking into account Amanda's experience and what she's talked about in terms of some complaints not being resolved for months and months on end.
Okay. Understood.
Amanda.
Hi, this question is for Sheila. I reside in a building where I have a bulletin board, and I just wanted to bring to your attention that often flyers or notices from TCHC, they get lost among their flyers due to agencies and residents, and they were putting other items over them. I was able to get a key from the super to have access to the bulletin board to clean up a lot of the old flyers and notices so that the important ones are there. Something that maybe we could consider when tenant reps are put back into place, that they can have access to keys boards. That way, the important notices, such as one for how to make a complaint or how to resolve issues that you have in regards to the call center, can be addressed, or they can have access to that. Another way my super solve this problem is by putting locked bulletin boards in the elevator, where he only places important notices from TCHC, such as the ones in regards to the call center.
Thank you.
Down, yeah.
Death by 1,000 posters, right? It exists in many of our buildings.
Okay, thank you. So I think I don't see any other.
I just have one quick comment. Quick question.
Who's that? I'm sorry, I can't pick. Oh, Uba. Yeah.
It's
Uba,
Uba.
yeah. And I'm glad to hear that we will have translated materials. That was one of my questions the council raised, and it's very important because a lot of people complain or be frustrated about not understanding the material and not understanding, being able to communicate English fully. So I'm glad to hear that that piece is covered. And quick question is, since we're giving more responsibility for superintendent, are we training them? And are we also training our tenants about rent calculation? That's another area that people often feel that they don't understand, or they've been overcharged or what have you. So are we doing training in those areas? Thank you.
So we have just very recently done some role-based training with tenant service coordinators, and those are the individuals who collect the rent, answer the transfer requests, manage arrears. We are developing role-based training for all of our frontline staff. That is work that's underway, so that would be supers, CMP1s, cleaners, TSCs, I just spoke about, CSCs, special constables. So there is role-based training being developed.
Okay, I see Paula has another question.
Thank you. Am I on? Thanks very much. I just wanted to ask on this process, which I'm sure we'll get into further. So I don't want to know everything right now, but good to hear this. I would simply assume that when somebody calls with a problem or calls again, that EasyTrack would also be a good place to let people know, this is your first point. If things don't work out, here's our complaints process. That the superintendent or of the building or whomever is in the hub would clearly say, thank you for this. We're going to look into it. If you're not satisfied within X amount of time, because Brian's right, we need to know what those KPIs are within a time frame, then everybody would simply get something and say, here's your next step after a certain amount of time, depending upon the severity of it. So a poster, I guess I'm a little concerned that we're just saying, well, we're going to put a poster up to say what that is. There are so many points of contact when somebody starts off that people can know what to do if this hasn't been solved. And also back from our staff that there's a number of things that are extremely serious and other ones, maybe a light bulb didn't get changed within 3 weeks or whatever. We also have to take those things into account, but I'm a little surprised to hear that we're into posters and everything else when every time somebody calls to say, this is happening, that's a moment where they're told, this is how we're looking into it. I think everybody gets my point here. I'm happy to see a poster, but I actually want to know how that will happen at all those touch points.
So let's, so I think we're at the point where we probably can move to a motion, obviously, to refer this to the Tenant Service Committee with a, and part of, I think, what the board is looking to is, yes, perfect. So Dara has a proposed language up there. So I'm wondering if that's, I think, Brian, as you were kind of, Brian and Paula, you were the, raise this point. Is that satisfactory for both or either of you?
Yep.
All right, so why don't we say Brian moved, Paula second. Can we have votes in favor, please?
I see Amanda Coombs, Adele Imrie, I see Councillor Bylaw, I see Brian Smith, I see Debbie Douglas, I see the chair, I see Uba Farah, I see Councillor Fletcher, I see John Campbell. The motion passes unanimously.
Great, thank you, everybody. Just before we conclude, I'm wondering, Susan, if you have any final thoughts, comments, if you're still on?
I see her, but she's you're muted. Well, sorry, you're not muted, but you're not coming through. We're not getting audio.
Just a second.
No, she's good. Yeah, she never mic on.
We turn her mic on?
You can. She's doing that right now.
Oh.
Can't hear you, though, unfortunately, Susan.
Sec.
Oh, there we are.
Oh,
you can hear me now, right?
Yes, correct. We
I
can.
apologize. I took my microphone off prematurely. I have no closing remarks other than to say how important I think it is and how gratified I am to see the board's interest in this issue and your commitment and dedication to making things better for tenants. Of course, the complaints are not only about maintenance issues. There are other issues relating to eviction proceedings and transfers and all kinds of things, but the principles that you have discussed and that you have charged management with following up on are really important to the well-being of your tenants. And, you know, as I said in my report, I think it's really incumbent on the board to oversee this and to make sure that it's done properly. And the discussion this morning, I know it's taken much too much of your board meeting time, but I think it's been very valuable, and I think that it bodes very well for some good outcomes down the road. So I just want to thank all of you again for your attention to my report and also the diligent follow-up that I heard even this morning in the conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for your time, and thank you to your staff as well, Susan. Appreciate their efforts, and I'm sure there'll be follow-up with you, especially as we look to develop KPIs, because I'm sure your information provides us with a starting point, but hopefully more detail to the extent you can share it, obviously given your various statutory obligations, but it certainly provides us a place to improve from. So thank you for your time, and you're of course free to you're free to stay, but you're free to go as well. So thank you and your staff, appreciate it. So with that, I think we can move to the next item, which I think is the OACH report. Sarah, what are we pulling up? Do we need anything for that? I think we can take the material as read.
And we should have Cynthia Summers on the line.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I think we can welcome. Good to see you virtually.
Good to be here.
Yes. So we've got your report. We've read it. I just conscious of time, so I may be flipping through the rest of the agenda pretty quickly. So if there's any one thing you'd like to highlight, Cynthia, please go. But if there are, and then we'll ask the board if they have any questions.
Sure, I won't take your time. The overview of the quarter is on page 1, and we're working well towards our goals set out in the work plan. The only other thing that I thought I might add for the board's benefit is to let you know that the work of OACH continues during COVID, that we collaborated with TCH and did calls to tenants to ensure that they were safe, and that the frontline workers in my office are continuing to respond to the referrals. They're either working remotely, we're all going into the office occasionally, and some of the early resolution officers are actually going out and continuing to meet with tenants. So with that, I'll see if there's any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the board?
So I just have a question.
Yeah, so Paula, hang on. I've got Paula and Adele. Anybody else? Okay. Is that you, Brian?
Yes, I'm trying to
So
figure
we'll
out how
do.
to get my name on. Let's see.
Yeah, okay, so we've got Paula, Adele, then Brian. So Paula, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just to have a bigger question because we've just come out of conversation about the ombudsman, I can't say it either, Tim, ombudsman report, and also the proposed tenant complaint process from our staff. And over a number of, I guess one of the things that I would like to ask, not even of you, Cynthia, but of Sheila or Kevin, somebody's moving all their papers around and it's already stressful enough.
Yeah, I think, Brian, you need to mute yourself.
Are we good now? Thank you. Thanks, Tim. That we're kind of looking at, have been frustrated because it seems that there's constant, the same issues happening over and over and over again. And I don't know how the systems that are being put in place are, or we're told being put in place or attempted to put in place, are ones that are being reviewed to say that's working, that isn't working, etc. I think that's probably the most frustrating piece here of the systems inside the corporation that either are or aren't in place or are or aren't working. And once our OACH has recommended certain things. So maybe I've missed it and that's all happening, but I would appreciate actually a comment from OACH, comment from Kevin, and a comment from the chair of the TSC on that particular issue, because we might want to bundle everything together at Toronto Tenant Community Services on the three fronts and include how the corporation is managing the key performance indicators or the structure to respond to chronic situations that OACH is uncovering.
If you'd like me to respond first, I'm happy to.
Sure.
Yeah, that's yes, please, Cynthia. Thanks.
Oh, that's a yes, please. I'm going to mute now.
You're taking over every role in the committee, Paula.
I'm on mute.
Oh, thanks. So in regards to TCH following up on recommendations or findings that were made by myself and the OACH, we've now put in, the report that went to the board last fall indicated that there was a high incidence of non-response and not following up on recommendations. Since then, I've worked really closely with Sheila, Penny, and Kevin and the senior management team to start working on a new arrears process. And OACH has actually taken a very active role in the creation of a new process, and it's going to be finalized very quickly. And part of that process will be more accountability in regards to TCH's response to OACH's recommendations. The other new change, which is positive, is that starting next week, along with Sheila and the senior general managers and some other people, we're going to be having quarterly meetings between OACH and senior management, purely to deal with issues around processes related to arrears collection. So like Sheila had said, this is a marathon, but I expect that in the area of OACH, changes will be evident by fourth quarter this year. So I think, yes, it's definitely been a concern and I've raised it in the past, but I'm very hopeful that we're on track to improve this. The final thing I'll say is the Ombuds talked about communication, and I think that's an area where there needs to be improvement. And I can tell you that in the proposed arrears collection process, there's a very fulsome contact that's made with the tenants, which has never, in my experience, occurred before. It is the OACH approach, and TCH is going to be doing a similar type of engagement.
Okay, thank you. Brian?
My comments were very similar to Paula's. I think, can we coordinate the information that which is reporting into those KPIs so that we can make sure we're addressing the issues as they're identified. So that's very similar to what Paula was saying. So that's all I'll say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Adele? You're on mute, Adele. There
Yeah,
you
no,
go.
thanks. I think my comments, and I know I'm repeating myself, I think Cynthia's addressed them. I just would find these reports to be more meaningful if they actually incorporated the collaboration with TCHC on the overall arrears issues. And, you know, the office's work with TCHC. To improve that. So I think I would find these reports more meaningful if they did include that, and same with the objectives, that it was more related to the collaboration between the two parties.
Thanks, Adele. I mean, one of the challenges, so for every report that I produce, I provide it to TCH in advance of even finalizing it. And perhaps in the future, maybe Kevin or Sheila can respond, they could write a response to the quarterly reports that I put out. One of the challenges is simply that because I'm arm's length from Toronto Housing, I've been asked by the board in the past to do my separate reports, but perhaps a solution is to have them talk as well about the bigger picture. Because to be honest, I can't really speak to the bigger picture of the arrears, for example, at TCH. I don't even have access to that kind of data.
Thank you.
I can talk with Sheila and Kevin about that.
Any follow-up, Adele?
It can be a separate report from management. I just think that the role would be more meaningful if you have this OACH approach, that there is training for people at TCHC so that they can use it, and that it has benefits to the organization, as opposed to, you know, the isolated goals that you have. It's not resonating with me as far as benefit to the organization as a whole, and that's what I'm more interested in.
I can tell you that just yesterday, and Sheila can confirm this, I wrote a report back to Sheila and her team around the new arrears collection process, and one of the things that I highlighted was that OACH should be actively involved in training staff, and in particular around the OACH approach. What I heard back from our team member last night was that they would be incorporating this into the arrears process. So I'm hoping as well. We've done training in the past, both to tenants and to staff, but there's been a lag. It's probably been 1.5 years since we've done training. And I agree. I think for success in these engagement with tenant objectives, there does need to be training, and I'm excited to be involved.
Okay, and I understand in the past there's been resistance to the role, and I understood from Sheila that it's being embraced more, but is not of great value unless there's follow-up and there's improvement as a result. So I think that's what I'm looking for, more than just, you know, the number of deficiencies or issues that are found. So
I apologize to be the one similar to the Ombuds bringing bad news, but I can assure you, Adele, that I think we're working really well with TCH on trying to address them.
Yeah, and I don't know if Sheila wants to speak up, but I understood that it was being embraced by management as well, or to a greater extent.
That's correct. So the Cynthia and her team have been involved in the development of the arrears collection process, the modifications that we're making, all about earlier tenant engagement, and Cynthia and her team's thoughts are represented in the process. And as she mentioned, we're beginning quarterly meetings between GMs and the OCH office so that we can move together more effectively on these issues.
That's great.
Just as what, and
The
sorry,
organization benefits from that. Sorry.
Okay, and Adele and any other board members, just as, you know, additional commentary on this, you know, Sheila, and we'll talk more about it at the Tenant Services Committee, you know, but Sheila has talked about and mentioned a few times on this about the hub playbook and the standardization and the rigor around processes and adherence to that and a descriptive of it. I think you've heard me mention, you know, on a number of occasions last year, you know, the inconsistency in process execution that typically happened at the, you know, throughout the corporation, so that things just, you know, there wasn't an appropriate and uniformed approach to dealing with it. I can't stress how important that work is that Sheila and her team, and in this particular case, along with Cynthia, are doing on the various elements, and certainly around the collections process, you know, within the organization in creating that hub playbook. It is, I appreciate that it's frustrating that it takes time, but to do it right, we really need to kind of investigate it and make it happen. And you know, while we did approve the structure, you know, of the reorganization, we did say it would take us the better part of 6 months to get people in place. COVID kind of exacerbated that, you know, a little bit. But that doesn't mean that, you know, even when we've got the people in place, that everything, you know, immediately flips. So there's a lot of work that's still going on with Sheila and her team in that regard. And I would say that I think Cynthia's organization and the company has a much better working relationship than it did a couple of years ago.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that. I think it's important that the two parties work together. And I'm glad they are.
Great. Paula, did you want to speak again? I guess not.
I did ask, when you told me I was taking over your role, I had asked that a comment be from OCH, from Kevin, and also from Linda, because she's been watching this for a long time. And we've had many recommendations for many years, and none of them have structurally, as far as I can see, had an impact structurally within the addressing of these issues internally. So I think we lost the moment, but when we have this conversation later, I'd like to know what those are and why that's so hard. Where is that impediment and how is it going to be removed? So I don't need an answer, but I think those are the two big questions for this one. And I will be forwarding, I don't know if we want to forward this, but in our discussions on the complaints, our discussions on tenant issues, as to whether or not we can incorporate some of this conversation as well, because it's a structural issue in operationally, without putting in my fingers, but I need to know that that has been solved. It's been a long time outstanding one. And now we're hearing we're doing that, we're going to do that. I'm giving lots of benefit of the doubt because we reorganized. If we don't have a clear oversight of the reorg, we might not get what we need at the end. So I think this is all a great process, part of the bigger reorganization, making sure that we're putting this corporation on a new footing. And I appreciate everybody's willingness to undertake that. It's pretty extraordinary. So that, I don't need to have my questions. I just had to say that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, so is the net result to receive this? I think we can receive it. I mean, I understand the TSC will be, you know, can in the course of reviewing KPIs consider the OACH issues, and I think it would be within its ambit to be able to follow up on those issues. So I'm happy to go either way.
Can you move that to receive and to refer this report and any OACH issues to the Tenant Services Committee in coordination with the Ombudsman's report and the complaints process, please? I also would like to have the Tenant Services Committee in public, if we can, in person, rather than on the phone. And I think the city's moving to in-person meetings in July. So that's my other request around this particular meeting.
I think that's a bigger issue. So let's just deal with this motion first.
Okay.
So, mover?
Debbie?
Debbie, seconder? Brian? All those in favor?
See the chair. I see Councillor Fletcher, Adele Imrie, Amanda Coombs. I see Brian Smith, Debbie Douglas. I see John Campbell. I see Uba Farah. Councillor Bailao, can we have your vote? Yep. Okay. I see Councillor Bailao. The motion passes unanimously.
Great. Thank you. So we're just wondering in terms of the rest of our agenda and our timing for this. When are when are people? When are we losing? When was this slated to go to?
I think we had it. Is it typically 12:30 that we usually go to?
Actually, 11:25 today.
Okay, but in terms of the meeting invite.
So I think the meeting was scheduled, given the agenda that we were aware of and the way that we allocated time to it. I think we had a schedule in our heads of 11:25, but I think the meeting, people should have in their calendar a longer appointment for this.
So 1 o'clock is where the meeting invite goes from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m.
All right, so we'll just have to
Tim, I have
work
to,
fast.
Yeah, Tim, I have to leave in about 5 minutes. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I have to leave early.
So, and I see we've lost Nick, but we still, what do we need? 1, 2, 3, 4.
I think we need 6.
I think we're still okay with those two, but we're starting to get close. So just looking at the rest of the agenda, I'm wondering what's the...
5 seconds. It's good for.
So I think that primarily out of the Building Investment Finance and Audit Committee, the contract matters that require the board's approval are a priority. I would suggest that from operations perspective, the relocation policy and the tenant engagement process, as well as the mortgage renewals are a priority. That you'll notice I'm leaving my matters out. I suppose the review of the BIFAC charter and the Rubin Tomlinson report, which was deferred from the last meeting. I'm in your hands in relation to those matters.
Yeah, I don't want to defer Rubin Tomlinson again. All right, so I assume contract awards we have to deal with.
Tomlinson, Chair, just to let you know, sorry.
Sorry, what's that, Paul?
We will also have to go into private for Rubin Tomlinson.
Okay. So, sorry, Paula, for all of it, or you won't be able to separate the private from the public? You're on mute, Paula. Still on mute.
Mr. Chair, so I don't know how you'd like to deal with that, maybe.
You were on mute for most of that, Paula, so I couldn't hear you.
Oh, God, am I off mute now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Reuben Tomlinson report is there's a public section, which we have, and there's also a confidential. The report itself is confidential, and I'm assuming that we are going to be discussing all aspects of it, including the confidential, so we can't have that in public. If we get a ruling, I'm happy to talk about it in public, but I don't think we can.
Well, the recommendations were all public.
Yeah, I'm talking about the report. Any questions on parts of the report that aren't public will have to be asked.
Of course, of course.
You're assuming that we're not going to be discussing the report, full report, questions about the full report. And I'm not sure that's the best way to proceed. But I mean, you want to figure out how to do that while we do something else, maybe?
Yes. Yeah, why don't we do the approvals first?
Well, there's, to the extent we've got business that needs, expenditure of money that needs formal approval, we probably should do those. So which of those, Kevin?
Yeah, I think if you look at item number 5, you'll see that A, B, C, D, E, F require.
A is just a charter review, so
Well,
A.
yeah, the charter and the charter review, we can certainly defer to the next meeting. That's but the other ones, yeah, the other ones are awards.
Okay, so let's get to her.
Okay, so if we can move to item 9B.
5B.
5B. My apologies. Item 5B starts on page 99 of the material. Vincent is on the phone. If there are any questions, I'm going to assume that the material is as read. And if any directors have questions on it.
I have a question on 9B.
5B, you mean?
Sorry, 5B. Sorry, 5B.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
It has to do with the additional cost that the city levied for the above grade permit. It was an additional $5 million was charged to the corporation because the above grade permit had not been provided. Did we fight that, or did we argue that, that additional charge and additional fee should not have been levied against us because it was owing to delays by the process put in place by the city that led to the delays causing the above grade permit to not have been issued?
I will ask Vincent to speak to that. Vincent?
Yes, so through the chair, this item in 2018, when it was approved by the board, this item was raised. Subsequently, the councillor at the time introduced a member's motion at City Council to request that the funds for the TCHC's portion of the development charge increase be returned to TCHC. And then again, through the 2019 budget process, Councillor Carroll also introduced a recommendation through that approval that in the 2021 budget cycle, TCHC's portion of that development charge increase will be considered to be returned once all the profits have been distributed.
So that $5 million will be coming back to the corporation?
It's not the full $5 million. That's for the entire project. TCHC's share of the development charge increase is about $1.3 million.
What is the total cash in lieu payment for the park?
So the entire cash in lieu payment is $6 million, and TCHC's portion of that is about $3 million.
So that was just added. Why was that not known 2 years ago?
So this project has gone through a lengthy approvals process. Originally, there was supposed to be a larger on-site open space and park dedication, but through the approvals process, that open space was removed, which required complete cash in lieu payment for the entire parkland dedication component. Obviously, a lot of time had passed since we submitted the application in 2013, and of course, land value had increased over that period. So originally Parks came back with a valuation of about $9 million, and through negotiating with Parks and City Real Estate, we were able to negotiate that down to $6 million.
So the original plan called for a park, and then the park was dispensed with.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, those were decisions made long ago. I don't need to contest that, but these are so the revision that's being presented us today is I'm just wondering, like, why was this not known just 2 years ago in 2018? This is a new update in regard to the cash in lieu. Why wasn't that amount known just 2 years ago?
Those amounts were identified in your confidential attachment that was in the in-camera session. We provided the 2018 confidential board report approval, and it flagged both the development charges, the park's cash in lieu payment, and some construction cost increases that we had not fully anticipated the entirety of it at the time. So we raised it as a risk in the risk section of that report.
Okay. All right, Tim, those are my questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, great. Can we get a motion to approve? On the board. Did I see Adele's hand? Excellent. Can you second?
Sure, I'll second.
All those in favor?
I see Mr. Campbell, Chair Murphy, Councillor Fletcher, Ms. Emery, Ms. Coons, Douglas, Mr. Smith. I see Mr. Smith. And I think we've lost Councillor Bilau. I don't see Ms. Farah on the screen now. So the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay. 5C starts on page 107 of your material. And I will take it as read, and Sheila is here if there's any questions on this particular award.
I don't see any questions.
Okay.
We have a motion, Adele, seconded by John. All those in favor?
I see the chair. I see Ms. Emery. I see Mr. Campbell. I see Brian Smith, Ms. Douglas, and Councillor Fletcher. Can we have your vote? Yes, I see Councillor Fletcher. So the motion passes unanimously.
Great. 5D, CHIP project.
Yeah, 5D is on page, starts on page 111. And again, Sheila is here, as is our VP of Development. Sorry, FM, my error. If there are any questions.
Could we stop the paper, Mr. Chair? Could you ask for that again? Thanks.
Yeah, people just have to make sure they're on mute when they're not talking, like John.
Okay. All right, so just any questions from the directors? Okay. Mr. Chair, if we can then move to a motion.
Yeah, I have a mover for that. Adele, seconded by Paula. All those in favor?
I see the chair. I see Mr. Campbell, Ms. Emery, Councillor Fletcher, Brian Smith, Debbie Douglas. Motion. Amanda. Ms. Coombs, I see your vote. Ms. Farah, can we have your vote, please? I see Ms. Farah's vote. The motion passes unanimously.
Great, thank you. 5E, please.
5E starts on page 118 of your material. And again, I will take it as read, and we have, if there are any questions, Vincent is here to answer those questions. Alan. Oh, sorry, it's Alan. I keep trying to give your work away to Vincent there, Alan. I apologize.
Papers.
No problem, Kevin.
Chair, I'm sorry. I'd asked you to be really strict with the papers. We're here now. It's going to be 4 hours shortly, and it is just crazy making to be on all these calls with all that interference. So I ask
I think
people muted that aren't speaking.
I think that was, to be fair, people shuffling into the chair to be able to speak to this issue as we were adjusting.
Well,
but fair point. I accept it. Done. I think people have heard, and thank you. I think it absolutely is best if people are on mute when they're not speaking. So, do we have any questions, comments on 5E? I don't see any, so can I have a mover? Adele, seconded by Brian. All those in favor?
President.
Sarah?
Oh, sorry. I see Councillor Fletcher, the chair, Mr. Campbell, Ms. Imrie, Mr. Smith, Ms. Farah, and Ms. Combs. The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. 5F.
5F is on page 122, is the mortgage renewal, and if there are any questions from the board members, Roseanne Lee, our CFO, is available to answer them.
It's just Tim here. My only question is this: number 2, as I seem to remember, we had dumb things coming to the board on this before, and the number 2 in this recommended motion covers off making sure the documentation can be executed, so dumb things don't come back to the board.
That is certainly the intention of that motion, that this would be the full and complete authority that staff would require to give effect to all of the transactions that are contemplated in paragraph 1.
Great,
and we'll
thank
treat
you.
it in that manner.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members? Okay, I motion to approve. I see Adele, seconded by Paula. All those in favor?
To the chair, Councillor Fletcher, I see Dell Emery, I see Ms. Coombs, I see Mr. Campbell, Mr. Smith, Ms. Douglas, Ms. Farrar, can we have your vote? We've lost
video.
Audio connection. Ms. Farrar, can we have your vote verbally? Oh, I see. Ms. Farrar supports the motion. The motion passes unanimously.
Great. So I think that's the 5 issues. Now, in terms of the other issues left, is it worth, I think it's, is the tenant engagement one we probably need to speak to, and I know there are some disparate views, so maybe that should be the next item.
And we've got deputants in relation to that item as well.
Mr. Chair, if I could suggest, on the President's report, we have a deputation, and on 7A, which is the tenant engagement update, we have two verbal deputations. And so out of respect for the deputants, perhaps we could hear their deputations.
Yeah, so why don't we have all the deputants go now on 6 and 7.
Okay, so if you can arrange on 6, Wahid.
So the deputant on item 6 is Mr. Kugali.
Hook him in.
I believe he should be in the meeting at this time.
Dara is just checking on the progress.
Okay.
Mr. Kugali? Hello, Mr. Kugali?
Okay, so let's come back. We have deputants on number 7.
The first deputant on item number 7 is Kathy Kunzman.
Dara's going to check.
Susan Gapka has been added to the call.
Who do we have?
Susan Gapka. Susan Gapka has been added.
Dara?
Yes.
We have the other, is the second deputant Susan?
Ms. Gapka. Yes, can we have Ms. Gapka's deputation?
Hello, good morning.
Hello, how are you?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I've muted the online. Very frustrating to wait so long for the agenda item, but I'm here and I have submitted a written deputation. You know me, I'm the tenant leader, tenant representative for a while now. I was just a young lad when we, yes, a youngster when we started this engagement process. So I have 2 parts I wanted to address. The first section is elections delayed, democracy denied. And after years of delay on the tenant engagement refresh, we now have us in a socially isolated tenant population with a lack of tenant representation in place to keep tenants connected, informed, and engaged. If only someone had suggested that the engagement model be done on time and closer to deadline. Oh, wait, that was me. Moving forward, on a remote virtual engagement model, there should be concerns raised about online security of remote voting, integrity of voting procedures, and influence or coercion on voting preferences while voting. Toronto elections have electronic voting at polling booths and could inform your processes and perhaps assist in implementation as they follow legislative guidance. And just the technology challenges around this meeting, and I know I appreciate we're all doing our very best to get through this, so thank you for that part. But we have a long ways to go to ensure that the legitimacy of remote processes are in place for tenant elections. I want to remind people that the tenant charter has all, I'm quoting from the tenant charter, all tenants will have the opportunity to vote for positions in Toronto community housing and have the opportunity to participate in meetings and activities. And so I don't have my clock up, so because I'm reading from the same place. So I'm just going to skip forward to maybe the next section. Oh yeah, here's the line where I said, build confidence and legitimacy on remote mechanics of board meetings, an example of an area for improvement. The second part is the open letter to Toronto Community Housing tenants on TCHC commitment to eliminating anti-Black racism and all forms of discrimination. And I take the quote out of the statement, and thank you for the statement. These events have moved me to reflect as a leader of an organization where large segments of our employees and tenants are Black. Just as we have deepened our efforts to improve living conditions and service delivery for tenants, we will deepen our commitment to eliminating anti-Black racism and all forms of discrimination. And I want to remind the board and the organization that we need to do more than deepen our commitment to eliminating anti-Black racism. We require practical policies and procedures across the organization, especially within the tenant engagement system. I have brought this to the attention of the tenant staff working group repeatedly and numerous times between my board deputations. This time, I wrote it down for you, so you'll have that in writing. This is demoralizing and disempowering that tenants' concerns feel brushed aside, and it takes a global mass movement uprising for this to even be addressed. As TCHC, we really must do better in this area. And one example I want to give you just in closing, I don't know where I'm at on time, but one example is when we tried to do demographic data in the tenant experience survey and how that was that was discarded because many tenants thought that we didn't need to have race-based data or demographic data, and as a member of the trans community where even that data is really important. So I just wanted to give you that one example. So I think we're at time and we're close to noon, so I respectfully submit those as my comments on the tenant engagement and hope that we can move this forward in the next few months.
Great, thank you. Do any of the members of the board have comments or questions for Susan?
I do, Tim. Susan, thank you for your deputation. And I just want to underscore your closing comments. It points to the need for messaging and communication about the importance of collecting race-based data. I understand why some tenants might be hesitant and not knowing how the information is being used. So part of collecting that data is to educate the communities from which we want to collect those data. So I'm hoping that senior management is listening. And so moving forward, we will include a communication piece in terms of, and an education piece about the importance of the collection of race-based data, including how the data will be used to improve the tenant experience.
Yes. Oh.
Did we lose you, Susan?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, I saw Debbie talking on the screen, but I have the phone on. Yes, I just really intersectionality. Thank you. It's got to come from the leadership. So thank you for your work on that. Collecting not only race-based data, but other disadvantaged categories. We've done some places better than others. And I think intersectionality is really important lens and framework to work with. So I pledge to help see this through as a journey that we started together a few years ago.
Absolutely.
Any other directors?
It's Linda. Just to also state that I think that this. Thank you so much, Susan, for your ongoing advocacy. I think actually your support with the tenant education around the importance of collecting this data will be really important. And just that if there's a need, if there's an opportunity to have a motion at some point to actually take this further, I think we have to move from comments to action around a topic that is coming up regularly at our board meeting.
Yes. So any other comments for the deputant?
Signal delay here, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I don't have your name in front of me. Yeah, I agree on all of that, and I think the education piece is really important, and having tenants engage in that as well. I mean, it's got to start from the top and work it from the bottom up too. So yeah, quite agreed and glad to see it on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Susan. Appreciate your patience with us and your participation.
I appreciate having the opportunity, and thank you, and good luck. We're all doing the best we can under the circumstances, and thank you for listening.
Not at all, thank you. Dara, are we able to reconnect with either of the other deputants?
No, Mr. Kugali dropped off the call, and when we tried to reach out to Ms. Kunzman to join the meeting, we got voicemail. So
our apologies to the deputants for our agenda has kind of been running late, so we've
sorry, we've got Mr. Kugali now. So
okay,
join him.
Sorry. Are you there, Mr. Kugali?
Give us 1 second.
Yes. Is he on 6 or 7, Dara?
He's on number 6.
Can you hear me?
Kugali?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you for your patience. So, yes, you are a deputant on the President and CEO's report on operational performance measures. So over to you for your 5 minutes. Thank you.
To my earlier deputation, where I put forward complaints about the systemic failures on the parts of senior leadership of TCHC, including senior management at 295 Shooter Street as well as 200 Wellesley Street. And I did formally ask for an investigation into that specific matter. There hasn't been any acknowledgement for my request for investigation or a response from the current CEO and president. So I would like to hear from the board on their position as to why, racialized folks like myself who actually have gone way beyond, the norm of making sure that a complaint is been put forward, why there has been no institutional response. I also want to point to the fact that the tenant's complaint process, which refers matters to the solutions team, is actually reflected upon by senior management or the general managers. My question to the board is, what is their complaint?
Hello. Did we lose him?
It appears that we've lost Mr. Kugali.
Sorry, is that?
Sorry, I was interrupted. I couldn't hear what the chair said.
Yeah, well, you cut out, but you got to make sure your deputation speaks to the agenda item you're on, which is the operational performance
so I
measures.
would like
please.
a response from, I'm speaking to the agenda item. I'd like a response from the CEO and president, as well as the board, with regards to how to make sure that the systemic complaints are addressed, especially when it pertains to senior levels of management. That was my question. And my deputation, I'd like to conclude in the following manner, is that what steps do community members have to take to ensure that they're heard and there's a response from Toronto Community Housing? The ombudsperson's report symbolizes the systemic failures that have been consistent over the past period, almost for a while actually, as to how tenants, community members, and folks who want to abide by the whistleblower policy, which, by the way, should be amended to include general members of the public, that policy is actually implemented. Thank you.
So, okay, so thank you. Does any director have a comment or question for the deputant? I don't see any, so thank you very much, Mr. Kugali. We were able to get hold of Ms. Kunzman, Dara, or no?
No.
Okay. All right. So should we then turn to, is tenant engagement the next item we should be dealing with among the list?
Tim, could I just make a comment on the CEO's report?
Yes, Well, before we get to that, can we sort of figure out what order we want to deal with the issues left in our agenda, and then we can I just propose, I think the tenant engagement update is one that I think of the balance, we probably need to understand where we're at, given COVID and COVID interruption, and
Well, it's just
because I'm a bit worried about losing quorum at some point soonish. So
I mean, I'm happy to move the CEO's report, and I just wanted to make a quick comment, and that was it. So it's up to you, Tim.
okay, sure. So why don't we do that?
So I just wanted to make a quick comment that I've been very, very impressed with all the work the senior staff has done to make sure that buildings are clean and really to avert a disaster, which could have happened. And just in reading all of the work that's been done, all of the preparation, the way that the staff has made sure the buildings are clean and safe, and it's a very thorough and rigorous process. And as a board member, I just want to recognize that.
Great. Thank you, John.
I think I'd like to move, John, it's Paul. I think you'd like to move a vote of thanks to the President, CEO, the COO, all the senior staff, all of the staff at TCHC for their incredible attention to detail and work to keep the community safe from COVID-19 during the pandemic.
Absolutely. Yep, I'm happy to do it. I'm sure Derek got that.
Paula will. Yes, Paula, you'll second?
Yes.
In favor.
And all in favor. There, we'll save you canvassing.
Yay.
Well done.
Thank you, directors. On behalf of the staff, I can tell you that it's muchly appreciated.
John, I assume you can, do we need to move the?
Sure, I'll move the report. Move receipt.
Thank you. Seconder? Paula, all in favor.
Be the chair, Mr. Campbell, Linda Jackson, Adele Imrick, Amanda Coombs, Brian Smith, and Del Uba Farah, and Councillor Fletcher. The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. So tenant engagement update, please.
So, Mr. Chair, I would just like to alert the board that we will be bringing, this report is for information. We will be bringing a fulsome plan back to the next board meeting. What we wanted to bring to the board's attention is that in order to advance the work that we're doing on ensuring that tenant voices are heard related to the quality of service that we're providing to them, we do need to move the process forward to elect tenant leadership. We have 84 communities who have requested the tenant representative model, which requires an election of tenants in the full building to elect representatives. We have 214 communities who have elected for building committees, where the building committee, it's a little simpler for us to do remotely. The building committee comes together and elects individuals who will serve as leadership within the community. So staff are simply notifying the board that we're working very hard to figure out how to resolve tenant leadership in every community across the board so that tenants' voices can be heard as we reflect on service delivery and tenant participation in our company.
I know I can't see everybody, but Paula, I know you had identified, you flagged this issue earlier in the meeting. I don't know if you have something you wanted to say.
Yeah,
okay,
I do.
sorry.
I do. I could ask a lot of questions, but I do have a motion I'm working on I understand 84 communities, 214 communities. I would like us to understand because we have a hub model now, that we would request you, Sheila, to lay this out by hub for tenant services. And then I'd like to know the number who came out to those meetings and numbers of people put their name forward. Is there a vetting process? I'm familiar with a couple of these situations which are highly unsatisfactory. And this is where counselors on your board are very helpful. And I'm quite concerned that that's the situation. So we are in the middle of tenant complaints, the best way to do that. This is a system that isn't aligned with our current reorg. I'm very unhappy with the whole piece, and I know people feel they developed the system. They developed the system prior to us saying our system or our organizational system needed a major upgrade, which our CEO brought in last year. So I am very interested in our committee understanding exactly where things are at. Maybe there was a meeting with 4 people. Are we going to say that that's robust enough? Maybe it was 50 people. But where's the strengths? Where's the weaknesses? What should proceed? What should stay back? I think that's the level of detail that I'd like to understand our staff are at. Once this is, I've told you this before, that there's through all of the number of CEOs, COOs, and everything else, long-standing people that have been stalwarts in their community where everybody knocks on that door for help have said they're fed up and just embarking on I'm very unsettled and very unhappy. So this board, I'm going to oppose this. I'm just not going to vote on it, but I want that report at the committee. So Mr. Chair, I want to know exactly. I think I heard you say, Sheila, that would be 8, 9, 294 committees and communities in total. And to get the details on that by hub area would be helpful. Or under each of the 3 COOs and not COOs, operating units, if however you'd like to do that. Because my experience with this is very unsettling, and I'm letting the board know that it is unacceptable, inappropriate, shallow, mile wide and an inch deep. And I hate to say that, but I've been saying this over and over and over again. And I feel like no one wants to have a look to make sure it's right. Same thing happened with the special constables. And now we're trying to find out what's going on. So I'm just letting you know I'm on this one, and I don't think this is I think we should align things a little better, make sure that was right, given the changes we've made. But I see the pushback from the staff is that we're just going to proceed.
So if I could just speak to a few items, the buildings that have either selected the tenant rep model or the buildings that have selected the building committees roll up to the hubs roll up to the regions. I can provide that breakdown for sure.
No, I want to be clear. There's a large community that had 7 people come to a community version and 3 of whom. So I'm happy to go in private and have this conversation.
Okay.
But I just can't, I don't want to hear about that. I want to hear about how many people were at that meeting when there's 800 people in a community. Did 5 come out? And now 3 of the 5 wanted, we can't just give that carte blanche.
Okay, so if I could just ask a question so I understand. What you're requesting is how many tenants were involved building by building in the selection of the tenant rep model or the building committee model? Have I got that right?
Yes, how many were engaged? It's a tenant engagement model. How many tenants were engaged in this election? What's your vetting process? And I can't discuss this publicly, but I'm very happy to go into camera and discuss this.
Okay. And if I would point out for directors, if you refer to attachment 1 that was attached to the report, we lay out the traditional tenant elections approach with a status report around what we're suggesting now. So I'm happy to go into a different forum to have this conversation, but I believe, as our deputant said, that we do owe it to our tenants to establish a representative leadership, tenant leadership, building by building, hub by hub, region by region, so that we can begin reporting on tenant satisfaction, tenant issues, tenant engagement. So we do need to, at some point, move something forward to establish tenant leadership.
I totally understand.
Okay.
But it wasn't me, and I don't know who else was on this board, that canceled the previous tenant structure and really upset a lot of long-term tenants who've been leaders. I didn't do that. That was, I don't even know if you were there at that time, Ms. Penny, but that was agreed to. They were cut out completely. This vacuum, I didn't create it. Management created this vacuum. We've got to fill it correctly. I want to know the vetting process for people who's putting their names forward.
Okay. So just a little bit of history. We did, the building committee process was moving ahead through the tenant engagement refresh. When I was acting CEO, a number of tenants came forward and said they were concerned that they wanted the option to elect to have the old tenant representative system, and that had been promised to them. So we circled back and we have gone out community by community to determine which form of tenant representation buildings wish to select. We believe we've captured that feedback in the 84 buildings that selected tenant reps and the 214 that selected building committees. I can provide some context on how those meetings were held to select either model, the number of tenants involved, whatever is helpful to the board.
I have a question.
Yeah, so I probably do too. So Brian, go ahead.
Did you set a minimum standard for the buildings to elect, so that you would consider like 33% of the tenants would need to be involved in the decision in order to, or so I'm just wanting to know of all those various decisions, whether there was a significant number of tenants engaged in the decision.
So we did not establish a threshold. Maybe we should have in hindsight, but we did record how many tenants were involved in the process to select either model. And I can provide that, but there was no threshold, and I am sure that we had buildings with very few tenants coming out who selected their model.
So I guess I'd like to have, a bit of a breakdown, if that's not too difficult, to know how many of the buildings had a minimum of 33% of the tenants engaged in the decision.
So sorry, I have a slightly different question, which is, what decision, if any, does the board have to make here?
So there's no decision required. This is a report for information, but because we know that this is a topic of great concern for the board and for staff and for tenants, we brought an update here to say that we would like to move forward with establishing tenant leadership across our buildings, hubs, regions.
Yeah, but I guess that's my question. If, not saying there is necessarily, but if there is a fundamental policy objection to tenant engagement in determining which rep or council model they picked, how is that, can that even be fixed if you're proceeding?
So I would have to gather that information and bring it back to the board. If that is the level of concern.
I don't have any idea though. That's my problem.
Yeah.
So just for clarity, there was a tenant advisory, committee that advised what the tenants, wanted to have as far as a representation process. And so and with COVID coming in place, the election process that we expected to have happen in the normal course of circumstances, delayed that. And to the point that, Councillor Fletcher made earlier, the tenant representation element at a building by building level has been non-existent for a period of time, for a significant period of time. And we are trying to correct that piece of it. And I recognize that, some of the board members that are on the board currently weren't on the board when the tenant committee, made up of tenants came through and made the selection process and then the modification piece of it. But we are simply here trying to rectify, an issue that has existed for a period of time, sort of stuff, and wanted to update you on our thinking of going through an electronic process as opposed to an in-person process to achieve the elections. I think the questions that are raised here are valid questions, and we should bring that back to the board for consideration. But I don't want to leave the impression, and perhaps I've just misunderstood the conversation, that this was designed by TCHC staff without tenant input. There's a very significant amount of tenant engagement on this.
So I guess I look to Paula and Brian, who have the most.
Thank you. I'm going to move that, and I know, I just have another question. What date did TCHC cancel or remove from office all of the tenant reps that were currently in office? What date was that?
I'd have to get that information back to you, but their terms expired and there wasn't a new process put in place because it was under review and consideration. And
I'm sorry. When the terms expire of anybody on this board, they're extended until there's a new process. So you did at one point determine that they were all out of office essentially.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that was 2017 or 2018, but I can get you that date.
Yeah. So I think everybody's kind of hearing where I'm going with this.
Yeah, and sorry, Councillor Fletcher, but one of the things that was happening as well was there's a dwindling amount of tenant reps that were willing to extend.
Let's know the number. Let's know what the number was, where they were. Dwindling number. The refresh. I understand tenants were very involved in the refresh. I don't know what the vetting system is. And I don't think that any of the new structural people have gone out to talk to tenants. This is being done by the refresh or revite group, not the people that are kind of in charge of the tenancies at the moment. So I'd like to understand if that's the case, because with new alignment, I think that Brian Smith brought up, he is on governance. It's a good question. I'll tell you, in a building of 220 units, 7 people came to a meeting, and then we would be proceeding with a vote. To me, is that really the fresh engagement that this corporation Is
Yeah.
Is that an anomaly? Is that a standard? What was the standard that we set? Apparently none. So there's a problem there. What's the vetting process? I don't know. Who does that? I don't know. So I just don't think that I'm prepared to accept this report and proceed. I'd rather have this conversation, and there's been so many of them that we've had to deal with, and COVID's in the way, have a really robust conversation. We're all agreeing that we've got a good model to proceed. We understand that maybe there's 50 communities that have had big meetings and they're all ready to go. And some of them are like the ones I described. What more has to happen? How are our OU staff and all of the new people that have been put in place carefully? And I've been watching since September. Finally, people are in place as people in the community to deal with tenants. What do they think this should look like? I just do not think we're ready to proceed. And everything's been teed up so well, and with everything else, this is the real big main event. And I'm sorry to be such a cold glass of water, but I can't be otherwise.
So hang on, Kevin. So I think it's I think it's a little dangerous using turnout as a surrogate for democratic results. But put that aside, I guess the question is, so we have a tenant representation problem, but obviously some process and informational concerns from members of the board. So I guess the question is, can we go have this discussion out in governance, which I think makes some sense as a committee, on a fast enough basis that we can solve our tenant rep problem and maybe get some of the answers that board members have in a sufficiently fast enough time to satisfy both goals.
Certainly, we can work towards that. If you just want to give us to the balance of the week when we'd be prepared to have, to make sure that we've got the material together to have that discussion, then we can work with the chair of that committee and the directors to perhaps call a special purpose meeting.
Yeah, I'm happy to have it dealt with, and I think governance is the right spot for it. I think it's a sensible committee to deal with it because I think it's a governance fundamentally issue. So I think I think I'd be happy from a personal perspective to have it delegated to that committee for consideration, review, and it can then deal with it as it deems fit.
Perfect.
And as part of that work, we will reach out to the directors who've expressed concern on there to make sure that we understand those concerns, so that hopefully we can, when we come with a discussion document, that we've addressed how we're going to handle those concerns.
Perfect. So maybe I can get the way to deal with that, instead of just a motion to accept, we have a motion to refer to the governance committee for its consideration.
And that, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for that. It's a good solution.
And second by Brian. All those in favor?
Seeing the chair, Councillor Fletcher, Mr. Smith, Ms. Emery, Ms. Coombs, Ms. Douglas, Ms. Farah. I don't see Mr. Campbell. I think.
Yeah, I see him. His hand.
Yeah, no, I see Ms. Campbell. I think Ms. Jackson may have stepped away for a minute, but the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. I'm thinking. So I've been thinking about the Reuben Tomlinson thing, and we have a date in July for a potential meeting reserved.
We do.
I think, unfortunately, given the split of public and private that has been identified, I think we need to put the Reuben Tomlinson on the front end of the agenda at the next meeting, so we deal with it appropriately, and then we can kind of slide from a confidential discussion as needed in a confidential. So it's the last agenda item on the confidential meeting, the first on the public, and that way we can deal with it in those two sessions. So I would suggest we move that to our July meeting and deal with it that way. I see a positive thumb up from Councillor Fletcher. So can we do we need a formal motion for that, Darryl?
No, we'll action that. We'll take the board's direction on that.
Okay, perfect. So I think that way let's make sure it's at the front end of the public agenda and the last item in confidential, so we give it the appropriate time and attention.
And Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I would also ask that all board members receive again the link in order to read the whole Reuben Tomlinson report, which is why I held that today. that we have an executive summary that's public. We have a report that's actually confidential, which is the one we're discussing. We're discussing that one, not the public one. So again, going back over, it's making sure that when we receive this, that we've read the actual report and can discuss that one. Thank you.
Sure, I think we do that by email and then password under a separate thing. So we
That's
something
correct.
like that. Yeah. Okay. So we'll get that out to everybody.
And I think then that the last matter on the agenda is the relocation policy. That does require the board's advice because there are concerns with respect to the manner in which the policy aligns with certain statutory provisions, and as well, that's what makes it important. There's an urgency in relation to the matter so far as there is a present circumstance that is driving concerns about applying the policy in a specific circumstance. So if the board, I think the staff needs some direction from the board in relation to that matter.
Okay, so let's jump to that. I know the materials have been provided. Is there just trying to look at what the,
Sorry, where are the materials?
we're at 7B.
Page 147.
Oh my God, help me.
It's up on the screen, Paula, if you can see it on your iPhone.
Okay, I'm going to this one.
Yeah, it's easier. I do the same thing. I've got a separate screen with my agenda on it so I can actually read it.
Sorry to interject through the chair. I just wanted to also flag on page 158 of the policy, there is a compliance and monitoring section. The person that would be responsible for the compliance and monitoring wasn't updated as per the restructuring. So I'm going to have to defer to Sheila on who she would like to identify in place of the Vice President of Asset Management.
Is that a statutory designation or administrative designation?
Administrative.
All right, so you'll.
And just for clarity, the Vice President of Asset Management would be the Area General Manager now.
You do this by area, not by head office position?
That is the individual who's got the same level of accountability and responsibility as the former asset management role, yes. I mean, we could make it that we could, I mean, if the board is.
Look, this is a fingers out. I ask the question, you make the call.
Right.
Okay, is there anything, so the materials were there, Paula, if you had I don't know if you have any particular questions. Is there one thing, I think, Dara, that you're flagging in terms of what's different or what's the issue is that we most need to be flagged and focus on?
So I believe that what the report outlines as being the issue that identifies the significance of the policy. At page 149 of the meeting material, there's a reference to the practice that has developed over time in relation to applying the policy such that overhoused tenants were not permitted to return to their former units if they continued to be overhoused at the time of their return unless they agreed to pay market rent. That requirement, while based on the City of Toronto's local occupancy standards, is identified as being inconsistent with the right of first refusal stipulated in the Residential Tenancies Act. So that's the statutory provision, and the policy amendments are intended to permit the tenant to return to their former unit and then to initiate the appropriate process to appropriately house the tenant once they've returned.
So it's we're amending our process to comply with what we view as the proper interpretation of the legislative requirements.
That's correct.
Question.
Yes, Paula.
This is for relocations, for revitalizations, or for unit repairs. Just under an N13, I guess if somebody's overhoused, one person in a 3-bedroom unit, if that is being completely revitalized, what is our policy now? They can move back to a 3-bedroom unit, or they could move back to a 1-bedroom unit.
Currently, the way we apply the policy is that we would not allow an overhoused tenant to return to an overhoused situation in a new environment. That appears to be offside with the legislation, which entitles the tenant to return to the unit that they vacated when the unit is reconstructed.
And let me just, then at that point, the second they would land, they would be, they would be overhoused, and then they could be moved to a completely different community. Because when you're overhoused, you don't get to say where you're going to. Am I right about that?
Yes, you are right about that, but there is a process and a timeline and an ability to refuse a location that kicks into that process, Councillor. So it's not quite as...
Sorry, I don't think anybody, and anybody who's overhoused in a revite already, this is where we need to be careful that we're not setting up a situation where we're spending gazillions of dollars and moving somebody into a 3-bedroom unit that they're actually not entitled to.
So if I could just respond to Councillor Fletcher's question through the chair. So in revitalization, when we're dealing with overhoused or underhoused, when they return to a new community or the new building, they are right-sized through that process. The difference is in when we're refurbishing a building, they return to their previous unit. So unfortunately, they would still be in an overhoused situation. So this policy is meant to address that situation. So
could we be clear that this is about refurbishment, not the revites? The answers I got back before you intervened were quite different. So I think to be very specific.
So in terms of so there's 2 types of revitalizations, and Vincent, correct me if I'm misstating this, because we do have when we have a revitalization where we knock down the entire community, start from scratch and reconfigure the entire community. We have a revitalization, which is essentially a major refurb process, and I'm not sure if it's Alexander Park that would reflect that or one of the other ones. But perhaps you could speak to, the situation, because I think it is a revitalization as opposed to a refurbishment that is, when I'm thinking of a refurbishment, this is not part of the capital repair program. This is still all part and parcel of the revitalization, is how I understand it, Vincent, within your team.
No, so that's not correct. So what we're doing with this policy is expanding it. Currently, the existing policy only applies to revitalization, but we recognize that there's other situations where the relocation policy would need to apply, such as accessibility upgrades, or where we're doing significant capital repairs to a building, such as Lumsden. So in those situations where we need to move tenants out, this policy would now apply. And of course, the difference is in revitalization, we're tearing everything down. There isn't an existing unit that the tenant can move back to, that map in terms of address. But in a refurbishment, we're only, doing the capital repairs necessary to that tenant's unit, so they would return back to their previous unit.
So, Mr. Chair, this is not for new units. It's only for existing units. And I think it would be helpful to have that clarified clearly. Because...
Yeah, I'm kind of in the clear as mud category myself.
Pardon me?
Yeah.
I'm kind of in the clear as mud category myself.
Now it's very clear to me that somebody that's having their unit knocked down does not get to go back to the same one.
Right.
Someone who's having their unit renovated and they must leave in order to have that renovation has the right to go back to the same one, which is if they've got 13, they can go back there. But if I don't want any mistakes here, so anyone who's in a revite where the building's being torn down in some way thinks they have a right to go back to a larger.
No, I understand. What my problem is,
let's
I'm
just
trying
get
to
clarity,
find
because
where
I'm
that,
clearly-
I'm trying to find where what you're saying is said in our policy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we should be clear.
So Vincent, if I can, looking at the document that is attachment 1 to the report and looking at pages 156 to 158 of the meeting materials, the policy that's before the board for its consideration, as I read it, differentiates between relocations in different circumstances, spelling out what the standards are to be applied in a relocation due to the permanent unit closure or revitalization. There are one set of standards that are applied, and then a second set of standards would apply to a large-scale renovation, and it's there on page 157 that you see the language in the third bullet that if a rent-geared to income household will be overhoused on the renovated unit at the time when it exercises its right of refusal and returns to the unit, the household will not be eligible for moving assistance from the move of it to its renovated unit, and then they have the right to they have a right to refuse on the return to the renovated unit as long as it gives us notice that they'll be relocating and complies with other conditions in the relocation agreement, meaning that they would remain overhoused once they've been relocated, and then we would deal with the overhoused situation once they're back in their former unit. Vincent, have I got that correct?
Yes, correct.
So if I understand it, what Paul identified as, I'm fixing up your unit so I'm fixing up the building so your unit doesn't exist anymore. Then I'm at page 156, and so I get a revitalization unit, but it's not my unit. And I get an appropriately housed unit.
Because your unit doesn't exist anymore. It's been.
Yeah, no, understood. That's what I said is the key trigger figure. So that's what the permanent unit closures or revitalization section means. I got that right?
Yes.
So I have a right to return to a new unit subject to the blah, 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 but it's not obviously, I'm not returning my old unit because it doesn't exist. However, if it's a large scale reno, not a revitalization, I do have the right to go back to my renovated unit. And this is where we think this is where the law puts us. But then it's subject to the proviso in that section. Then we've got the emergency situations. So what I want to do is make sure that what Paula articulated as the clarity around the standards is in our document.
I believe so.
Can I ask one more thing, Mr. Chair, please?
Of course, Councillor.
Thank you, because we're right on the same page here. I am assuming that both tenants, either in a revitalization or what we're calling a renovation or total unit refurbishment, are going out under an N13. They are being technically evicted with the right to return. Is that correct?
I would have to call a friend, Sanya, who's the manager of relocations, on the call. So she would have to confirm whether it's an N13 that's issued to renovations as well.
That's clear that we need to know that is under current legislation N13, and what articulate that you have the right to return to that community in a right-sized, and that's on your N13, because it's all very technical, but I wouldn't want to I appreciate the chair clarifying that. And if you think, Mr. Chair, that needs any other tightening up, please let us know. So there's no question here. No rumors, nothing else. You're gone from your big unit, coming back to a different.
Well, ultimately, I would look to Dara to confirm. I think Dara, you've heard
I've heard the concern, but I'm going to echo Vincent's comment. I believe Sanya Arpadzic, who's the staff contact in relation to this report, is actually in the meeting, and if she could respond to that question, I think that would be helpful to the board.
Yes, I'm present. So we usually use M13 for all the movements, and you are right, Councillor Fletcher, for the renovation and for the rewrite. The right of the return is given to everybody, but until now we had a right to the return to the right unit size. So we treated the both group of tenants the same way. However, in the units which were not demolished, which are just being refurbished, they do have the right of the first refusal. And because we applied the same principle to these tenants as we were applying them to the tenants in the rewrite sites, we did not give to those tenants a right to come back unless the unit size that they are eligible for is the right unit size that they are going back to.
That's illegal.
So that's the change we're making.
Yes, now we are just giving that right to the tenants who are going back into refurbished units.
Okay.
So I will just follow up. I chair the Rent Evictions Committee at the city, and I will say that there's nobody else that gives out an N13 and everybody has a right to return. It's quite amazing. In that sense, TCHC is really the best landlord in the entire city. And I think our tenants need to be reminded of that there are people who are being pushed right out on the street, no right to return, not given that. And we do spend a lot of time and attention. And I really want to give a lot of praise for that. For that N13 that Sonia's talking about, unless the building is coming down, then that tenant actually has a legal right to go back to that unit if they want that unit, as I understand it. So I think making sure that's clear in our policy and that we're within the law is great. And then the overhoused piece starts there because, but they could decide to come back to a smaller unit in the same building. That's a lot of work. And then we're not spending all the time relocating them. But truly, I think tenants need to know all that at the beginning. This is a unique situation. They get to come back. Be careful what you ask for because you might be right out of the community that you lived in if you select a smaller unit from the get-go.
Okay, thanks. Well, Adele, I know you had a question or comment.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused if we're giving them their existing unit to ensure that we're compliant by immediately starting the process to move them to a right size unit. Are we then non-compliant? I view a first right of refusal as not a temporary thing, I think.
So to answer let me answer Adele's question first, if I could. And then, and so Adele, the answer is no, we are not compliant. We have an overhoused policy, so the Residential Tenancy Act requires that we allow the tenant to come back to their unit. Our policies that are in place, in terms of if you are a single person in a 3-bedroom facility, then you're overhoused and so we have a policy for overhoused to take care of. That's also, runs with the legislation. So the answer, a bit of a long answer to your question. The short answer is we would be compliant when we move through the overhoused process. What this is really trying to get to, and I think Councillor Fletcher said it best, it is the legislation that we are making this policy compliant with is to avoid rent eviction. And so that's what we are doing in the policy adjustment to ensure our policies support that.
Can I just be clear on one other thing? It may be helpful, Adele. They were speaking about RGI units. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But when you're coming back to a subsidized unit and you're overhoused, then you don't have the right to be overhoused in a subsidized unit. If somebody's paying market rent, we don't really have the same leverage that we have on RGI. So that's,
Yeah, you can agree to pay to be overhoused if you want, as long as it's market.
you're paying for it. That's correct, Tim. So we really have to be clear here that this is for the RGI population, which makes up 90% of Toronto community housing.
Okay, with that, are there any other, are we okay to
No, I
move?
think I understand. Thank you.
Are we okay to move approval then?
Yes, with those.
Yeah, understood. I think your clarifying comments are helpful, Councillor Fletcher. Thank you. So moved by Paula, seconded by Adele. All those in favor?
To the chair, I see Mr. Campbell, I see Adele Imrie, I see Ms. Coombs, I see Councillor Fletcher, Mr. Smith, and Ms. Douglas, Ms. Jackson, Ms. Farrar, can we have your vote? And I see Ms. Farrar support. The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. So I am out of steam. Is there?
I'm sending lunch over. Did it?
Not the only one.
I just got so hungry watching Brian eat carrot sticks.
You just need to have a cappuccino maker beside you, then you can
No
re-steam
kidding.
yourself.
I know. Look, my coffee is done. So is there any other, I know we skipped over your charter review, but I can't stomach it. We can deal with that in our next meeting, I'm pretty sure. So is there any other business? Okay, so can we have a motion to terminate the meeting, please? I see a unanimous movement of that motion. Debbie moved, Adele, all those in favor. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. Bye-bye.